Cool. All right. So we're here for the second part because I have decided we're going to be splitting this thing in half for good reason for the viewers. But we're going to be talking about the main topic, which is going to be our favorite album covers, metal or not, of the 80s and 90s. So I got a slide deck on hand. It's going to be 5 album covers each for our top 5, and then we have 3 honorable mentions, so we'll start there. So it really ends up being kind of like a top 8 for everybody. And then I told the panelists too, I want us to be very explicit about our number 1, but all the other ones, it's not like number 5 is better than number 4 or anything like that. And even the concept of better is very abstract here. It's just our personal favorite, and it really shows our taste. But yeah, let's just go right into it. Is that cool? We'll keep the same rotation. So Dan, you're going to be up first.
Okay, cool. And we're doing the 6, 7, 8 ones, aren't we, first?
Yeah, so it'll be 8, 7, 6, and then we'll do next for Shindy 8, 7, 6, and so on. I'll keep it all in check.
Nice one.
Cool. Another thing is this actually was kind of. I'm not a graphic designer, so yeah, I made this in PowerPoint. Don't rib on me too hard, right, guys?
It's all right. We all got to do what we got to do.
Oh, cool. We've got, right.
Oh, that's awesome.
So this one, it's not that it's the most amazingly executed piece of art that you will ever see, but this was probably my first view into landscape style pieces that I love. And for me, I've got 2 main loves. There's the character-based ones, like classic thrash covers, right? Like Rust in Peace or something, or Iron Maiden. And then landscape stuff like Dan Seagrave and a few others. But this one was the first one I saw, and it's kind of green and purple, and it just looks so rad. And I love, to me, the green and purple is just the most thrash thing ever.
Definitely.
And within that, you've got that skull that is formed as into the negative of the landscape of that winding path and trees. And as a kid, that combined with the fact that this was a really rare thing to own, and I've got it on 12-inch and CD as well, actually, nice. Which is pretty cool. And that was from a long time ago. Yeah. That stuff was so rare. I think the rarity of it mixed with it being a bit of a unique thing for Metallica, because Metallica are a joint favorite band with Megadeth, and they didn't have many airbrush style covers. There's like this and Jump in the Fire are kind of really weird bits of art for them.
This looks like a death metal cover.
It's crazy. A bit more airbrush and a bit less detailed. But it's more the fact that I just thought that kind of purpley, blue and green combination with the winding path on a landscape was just a really cool piece of thing. And it's not that I would say this is the 8th best cover ever done, but just in terms of how important it was to me, it was like a super important part of my youth that made me go, I want to do that. and I love the landscapes. I love the inverse use of the landscape to create a skull within the piece, which a lot of classical painters did little tricks like that back in the day. And yeah, that's all I've got to say on that.
One quick fact on this cover is so Kirk Hammett, I think, is friends with Alvin Petty. He was just hanging out at his house, drinking some beers. He saw the artwork on the wall, and he was like, hey, can we use that for Metallica? So it's actually not commissioned for the song.
That's so sick.
Yeah.
Because I didn't know who actually did this. I mean, normally I'm a total nerd with like leafing through things, but I never really knew who the artist was, because it wasn't necessarily, unlike other covers that we will talk about, I instantly go, I want to know who that is. I recognize his style everywhere. I want to go into it. This piece doesn't have any of that. Like
it's not always documented either. I mean, there's some covers with great artists where there's no credit or anything, and even on Wikipedia, there's nothing about the artist. So
I had to hunt down all these. That was actually probably the hardest part of putting this stuff together, man. Because you guys put some curveballs, man.
Well, this is a case where, since you mentioned it, not being commissioned by them, it looks like the logo and the title are on the painting. So, but that obviously must have been a different layer, and he just matched it. But they look like they're a part of it. Like that Metallica logo is slightly janky in areas, in a way that it looks like they just painted it on there and did their best.
Yeah, and maybe it was just like a sketch version that he saw, and then he maybe recreated it, because the story is kind of fable of sorts. But
creeping death, literally, it sort of ties in very literally.
But yeah, as James says, like there's perfect room for the logo and the title. There's just so much room for it. So it's almost like a match made in heaven or hell.
Yeah. Definitely, yeah. And even though that kind of, I mean, I love that Metallica logo. It's one of my absolute favorite iterations of the Metallica logo. But the creeping death font is really kind of quite crap. And if you think about it,
it is a little, but that's part of the charm, isn't it?
Exactly.
Like they would never do something like this. Like in the past 20 years, never.
Yeah, you would. I've described it as almost a piece that you could see. Imagine it air sprayed onto a van or a carnival ride.
Yes,
the bottom bit of it. It's got that level of slight. Not cheesiness is the wrong word, but a bit campy, hand drawn
bootleg. Yeah, like a really campy bootleg that someone's done. Yeah.
But so it was an interesting, but maybe a bit more of a curveball compared to the rest, which are probably all very, very obvious answers as far as my own choices.
It's refreshing though, seeing this and not the other covers that are amazing, but that we've all just like seen and talked about probably a million times.
That's right, because I think I'm not going to be revealing any surprises later on with the pieces. But, you've got to be faithful to yourself and what you've grown up and what's super important to you. And, this one is as much as the other ones. Yeah, there you go.
Cool, man.
So we got this bad boy.
Oh, hell yeah.
Right. Yeah. Now,
I don't know this at all. This is sick.
Oh, yeah.
This is Andreas Marshall, who you know loads of his works. More recently, he's done, I think, bands like Warbringer and stuff, but he did all the early In Flames albums up to...
He did Jester Race and stuff?
Jester Race, up to not including Clayman, so probably stopped at Colony or whatever that one was. He did Obituary, he did End Complete and Frozen in Time, and maybe other stuff. And you can see, because this cover, and I don't think I've got End Complete in here, do I? No, I would have put End Complete in here, but this album cover is very much like Obituary's End Complete, except if you step outside the world and viewed it through this fantasy golden mirror style abstract, it's like a fantasy realm that you're looking through a window as opposed to actually being in that realm itself. But this is Blind Guardian, or German power metal band.
There you go, that's the Obituary.
Just for comparison, I know it's tiny for you, Dan, but you can really see it.
And it's the same kind of rock. He's got a style with a bit of white airbrushing to make everything look like this. It's got the shimmer on it. And he paints rocks in a very similar way that's really cool. But it's just the ornate framing. You get a full story with this one. Whereas, like, what are you in to look through this window into this other realm? And the music's
conceptual.
Very, and the album's awesome because it's like this proper hybrid of thrash, speed metal, and power metal, which is
it's got more
really
balls
cool
to it.
Totally, it's that good hybrid, very German sounding, I suppose, in terms of I think that was maybe 95 that maybe came out, but it's definitely got that hangover from the 80s in terms of what was popular then. But just I love the fact that it's slightly airbrushed, but not mega airbrush looking. It doesn't feel like it's cheap and cheesy. It feels like it's somebody who really knows how to paint, but also use an airbrush effect for those white highlights. And you can tell Andreas Marshall's stuff very much by the glow on things. He's done Creator as well. He's done a bunch of I think probably, I don't know if Violent Revolution or Coma of Souls or something, but around that era of Creator albums. So you'd recognize dozens and dozens of the stuff that he's done.
Did he do Coma of Souls?
I don't know. I'm plucking them.
That's so iconic, man.
I kind of think I could imagine it being Coma of Souls.
I'm just trying to
even the text on the bottom, like the little book, you've got the really intricate text work that he's done, almost like Aaron Hawkey-esque, really cursive.
It makes me wonder how big this piece is.
For sure.
Like, is this like 36 by 36 just to get all this detail in there? Like, it's insane.
Has to be, surely.
I think it probably is. I've only ever seen one of his pieces. It was for I can't remember who it was for. when we actually painted it, but it did look like it was a decent size of canvas. Yeah, because it is obviously super detailed. But I'm just checking up. It does look like Coma of Souls and Violent Revolution and the live creation stuff that he did as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, he's just like, and he did Obituaries anthology as well, which looks very similar to the End Complete because it's kind of taking, what's an anthology out minute. But he's just got a really good style, and he did loads more Blind Guardian stuff. Like Nightfall in Middle Earth is a very kind of classic, recognized cover, and all the previous ones behind that. And I've mentioned it before, but the theme that he always seems to have is these silhouetted characters or items that have this fantastical fantasy glow behind them, which is just done at the right point of taste, I would say, because it's really, I don't know if you've ever tried to do this by like kind of having a soft airbrush type glow on things. It's really easy to overdo that, and
it can be tacky.
Yeah.
So it's very unforgiving when you're doing it by hand, man.
Yes.
No one do
well.
Oh man, I played around with an airbrush when I was in my last year of school, and it was not easy to kind of, when you don't know really what you're doing and just having a go. And you have to mask everything off and what have you. I have no idea if what I did was terrible or worse than that, but it was.
I imagine he had to airbrush that white halo and then paint on top of that. But again, like you say, you could easily go far over the top and just really miss the mark on that.
Mm.
I was talking with Chad Keith recently. We're talking about airbrush and just like how we love the effect, but we hate actually airbrushing. Like, it's not fun.
No.
You gotta clean it. Like, it's brutal, dude.
That's right, and I admire everyone that does it. And you can see why, as a process, that people will not do that sort of art as much anymore, because the amount of effort that goes into that compared to, digitally doing stuff or what have you is just. Just so much worse, really, isn't it, doing that? But he does really detailed skies as well, and clouds.
Man, that sky, the top right, like the sun on the top right, and the way it's got this vortex of clouds is just so well done.
This guy must have done a ton of like power metal around this era. Like,
I think
Hammerfall.
I could see. Did he do Hammerfall too?
Yeah,
that makes
sense.
Positive,
oh, that 100% makes sense. Yeah,
that's right. Well, I mean,
you can see bands German. Like that, or Symphony X, or Demons and Wizards, like all those kind of folks.
Manowar.
Yeah, like just really digging on this sort of stuff because it looks like those covers.
Yeah, it's definitely that. But I mean, he's German, and a lot of those bands like Hamfall and Blind Guardian are all German, and he might have done the Demons and Wizards stuff because that's got Hansi Kirsch from Blind Guardian singing in it. So there's probably a crossover there. So it wouldn't surprise me. But yeah, it's very power metal, and it's suited to that. And it looked cool on the In Flames stuff as well, even though they're a bit more the Melodeath thing. But it's just those alien worlds, really, isn't it? Where it sucks you into a realm that doesn't exist, but is within the realms of you can grasp its existence rather than it being completely surreal, and manages to make rocky, barren nothingness look really interesting, which I always find is quite a skill. Like the End Complete cover for Obituary, there's like nothing in it, but I love it. It's one of my favorite covers.
So good.
But
so many good
and I guess good composition, good use of values. Wicked artist. So this is a cool cover. This is one with all of these ones from now on, I could have picked loads of covers by the same artists. It's just you have to pick one. And I'd have probably picked, there's a reason I'm not picking the Obituary one, because End Complete means more to me than a cover of this one. They're just very similar pieces of art that I really love. And I didn't pick the Obituary one, otherwise there'd just be an awful lot of Obituary listening through this.
A lot of great covers.
Yeah.
An artist who's creating a lot of work right now, that I feel like is kind of like following in his footsteps in his own way. I mean, as a compliment, but I hope I'm not mispronouncing it. Is it Juanjo Castellano? He did the Void Ceremony cover from this year. I feel like he has a good sense of like texture and landscape as well.
Did he do the Verminous cover for Black Dahlia? I feel like
he might have. Is that the green one?
Yeah.
I think so. Yeah,
he did the Majesty's album as well, and 20 bucks.
That's him. Yeah,
he's a digital painter as well. I want to have him on the show sometime too, but I feel like he kind of comes from that same conceptual. Like, I just feel like they're the same muse. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
I definitely see a lot of Seagrave and Juanjo's work
Yeah.
In terms of landscape, and just more, conceptually, I guess it's a bit similar to this, but definitely from the style wise of the lighting, that's a bit more in the Seagrave style of where he's learned his trade, I would say. But yeah, his covers are wicked. He's really, really good.
Yeah.
Oh, there's a surprise.
Speaking of obituary.
Yeah.
One of us had
Michael
to pick
Whelan.
it.
Oh yeah, definitely.
I mean, this is it just had to be in just because Michael Whelan is just like the absolute master as far as I'm concerned. And he just doesn't put a foot or a finger wrong. And this piece as well is just peak Lovecraft, and it almost reminds me of the dark computer games from the early 90s, such as Shadow of the Beast, even though it's nothing like it, but it captures this vibe of not gore horror, but suspense horror. So, it's not bodies being ripped apart, but there's a total dread and terror in this kind of thing. And obviously there's dead bodies.
Super bleak.
Yeah. And just the color choices as well here, like, because this wasn't done for Obituary. This was specifically, it was for a Lovecraft book, I believe. And
that makes sense.
He did that consistently. Double licensing stuff.
Absolutely. And the back half of this piece was used by Demolition Hammer for one of their albums, which is really cool. And you can completely see side by side when they're different bands, different albums, but it's the other half of the same cover that was used for books. So that's a little fact that's worth digging into if you may or may not have known that. And I'm sure it's the sort of thing where everyone either goes, "Oh, mind blown," or "Yeah, duh, I knew that," but only because they Googled it or been told, a year or 2 or 3 years ago. But
I wonder if Whelan is a metalhead. He's got so much
he has to be, man.
He has to be. Like there's so much. I mean, every Kirathungal record is his Elric stuff, and there's the back.
Oh yeah, Demolition Hammer. Yeah. Oh, sick.
I'm so not used to seeing the back of it. Yeah, that's crazy.
His level of detail, like the sharpness, that was a huge inspiration for me. Just very sharp highlights, very clear understanding of light and anatomy, and just
all the elements are so clear with his work.
Yeah, it's clean. It's grim and bleak, but very clean.
Yeah.
That's right. He completely nails that. And I think, like you just mentioned, his understanding of light is just second to none. It's like, I mean, it's not like Frazetta, but it's similar level to me of that god tier of just knowing how stuff works. And can paint landscapes of things that do not exist, but they believably exist just because the placement of light feels so perfect and realistic. And
it's just so tangible the way he does it.
Yeah.
And still, every year, bands are putting out records with his work on it. Like the Smolder record from this year, like that cover is amazing. That's one of his pieces that I hadn't seen before. I thought they commissioned it. But like it's like that's one of my favorite covers of the year. But it probably was made in like the 80s or something.
Yeah,
I need to check that one out in a bit.
And like obviously very technically talented, but just. He knows how to make iconic images.
Yeah.
That's like, it's like you can have a really good musician, but they can't write a catchy song. He can write a catchy song. You know what I mean? Like that's the thing with that's what makes Michael Whelan different than all the other technically gifted painters, I think. Sorry,
definitely.
Dan.
No, I was just going to say credit to whoever put the logo in this and just did a flat red one, because I love loads of the Obituary logos, but if you'd have put one of the rendered end, like the End Complete or Slowly We Rot style logos on this, it would have totally ruined it. But that flat red logo to pick out the eye, to me, is a good example of it. Absolutely, it makes the piece because it just adds that little bit more red that it needs into the whole thing. I love that about this. I mean, it might have actually been just a terrible choice by somebody who didn't know anything and went, "We're having red," but for whatever reason, it's worked beautifully.
That's a case of somebody like that just being a good design choice, and like just knowing how to put the cherry on top in the right way can really make a piece. And this, this is iconic at this point, even with the like I don't love the title font, but like it also feels like very of its era, so it kind of fits. I don't know. It's weird.
And there's room for it, it's not like it's taking away. There's
Right.
plenty of space for it to breathe, so it's not, garish in any sort of way. So I'm guessing it's airbrush and acrylic. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's got that fuzz on the edges.
Mm.
So I don't know.
He uses he does oil painting, but Michael Whelan mostly does acrylic. And I'm basing this because I follow him on Instagram. I mean, I'm sure you guys do too.
Oh yeah.
But like he always credits what mediums he's using, which is helpful because he uses so many. But a lot of times it is acrylic, and then when he's listing acrylic, it's hand painted plus airbrush.
Yeah.
Cool.
To me, he's the. Sorry, there you go.
Oh no, I was going to go on a tangent, but like he posted earlier this year, he has an Excel spreadsheet, or his assistant does, of all the different AI violations of using his artwork. Like he's a stickler about it, man. He's like he's very much fighting that fight. Yeah.
Get what's yours, man.
Totally.
Yeah. And he needs to, because it's really annoying when people can come along and just put Michael Whelan and a bunch of other stuff into their own prompt and then churn out 10 years worth of work in about 5 seconds, which is very.
The thing is, there's no opt out of this as well. That's the thing. There's no option for you to say, actually, I do not want my work to be, there's no opt out. There's no opt in and there's no opt out. It just pisses me off, dude. Yeah,
because somebody else can just like put you in. And like you got no control over it. So like that's something in the like in the next year or two is there's going to be some big decision whether we like it or not.
Like, I didn't mean to go down the giant rabbit hole.
That's all right.
It's interesting that Whelan is very adamant about that stuff, and he's in a position of power,
And I think one of the reasons as well is, like, obviously I'm at least a semi-competent artist, but he's so good that like I'm influenced and inspired and I love his work, but I find that there's not necessarily that much in my own, because to me he's just so many levels above what I would feel is achievable myself. So it's always a bit more galling when it's easier to do when you just like type a few other sort of little bits and bobs in. But leaving the AI aside, like what I found about Whelan is just that he is just somebody where you go, I'm so blown away by this, I couldn't even begin to approximate that as an influence in my own stuff. Like, I mean, maybe conceptually, or you maybe take cues or color choices for him. I did the first Inhuman Condition album I did sort of borrowed a bit from the color palette from Chaos AD, even though that everything else is different. So you can take cues in that way, but I find that just like his ability to paint everything so beautifully detailed, and there's no kind of implied detail in anything. Everything is accurately done. It's just phenomenal. Absolutely, just the master as far as I'm concerned. Like,
he knows when to leave things open as well. Like, again, the big sort of open, atmospheric, foggy essences that he has there, juxtaposed against the really sharp edges, really deep shadows, and like the sky and the moon, the way it's very like airbrushed and open, just so it gives more emphasis to the foreground. It's just so confident. Like, you can tell he knew exactly what he was doing, like when he was painting this piece.
Which is, I think, true for everything I've almost ever seen of his work. Everything's so perfect and deliberate. So a
ton of range too. He's got so much range.
Everything from Dark Tower to death metal,
fantasy, like crazy. Psychedelic, just so good.
Yeah,
so good.
And it helps when it's on a Wicked album as well. Just that's just the end of it. Like, I think when you get the art and the music combining, like, this isn't my favorite Obituary album, but I would argue it's their best album against myself. And I think just the combination of it all just turns something that could have been good into something completely magical.
It's probably the T-shirt I want the most.
Yes, same. I was I could have gone and see them in Glasgow, because I know Terry Butler, who's in the band now, because I've worked with him for a bunch of other stuff, and I wanted to go and hang out with him, but I was away, and they were only playing a few hours away from me. And there's two reasons, James, and one is because I really, really want a long sleeve Cause of Death shirt, because it is so rad. So, but still waiting, Anyway, sorry, we'll move on to the next one.
Oh, that's fine. We're pacing this fine. And believe it or not, Obituary's #1 sold shirt is End Complete shirt. You can look it up. I don't know where the source is, but End Complete is the best-selling, one of the best-selling death metal shirts of all time.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. I'm not surprised. Yeah.
Maybe like the catalog scene of the 90s or something. So I kind of made up your 8, 7, and 6, if that's cool. But I went with this one for your number 8. Shindy, it's your pick.
Oh, me? Yeah, sorry. Yeah, cool. I was just going to say, Dan, did you pick the same one? yeah, no, I love this. Like, Crypt, obviously, just the music, especially, like, this album was the first album I heard of theirs, and it just the production is just super tight for that era, just incredibly tight, so heavy. And what I love about the actual cover itself is the pale sort of white colors and warm colors is something that I didn't really see much of in that era. It was all very like, blues and reds and, dark sort of muddy sort of colors. But there's something about the really bone white kind of color hues that they've got here that make it seem, like heavenly almost color choices. But then you look at the actual structure and everything and it's super grim, like very dark. And maybe in terms of technical ability, I didn't know the artist. You've actually managed to track it down really well. I wouldn't say the most impressive technical ability I've ever seen in terms of a landscape, but just the sky, the color choices, the way the foreground just really pulls you in to that centerpiece.
It's kind of like Dan's number 8. It's got the metal spirit, and that's important.
Yeah, 100%. And it's just got this really almost celestial, elegant feel about it, but also really grim, just because the color choices and the line work and everything. And mainly just musically, just one of my favorite tech death bands, just so brutally heavy. I really loved your watercolor that you did on this piece as well. That actually is what actually brought it back into my mind.
I appreciate it.
Was seeing that piece and thinking, oh man, I remember seeing this in a Kerrang magazine years ago of I think it was like most brutal tech albums from the 90s or something in Kerrang magazine. And I just saw that cover, went and tracked it down, and just so sick musically and the artwork itself, really sick.
It's almost like Dark Crystal, Brian Froud sort of style. Like it's not about being realistic at all. And that's
almost like a Terry Gilliam. Yeah. That's what I love about it.
Very much. And I gotta say, as much as the typography choices that are happening with that title, as janky and confusing as they are, there's something kind of really charming about it.
Yeah, I quite like it. Yeah,
make the E real long.
Why is the E so stand out in Blasphemy?
Because there's not a crossover between. There's not a deeper meaning behind that, is it?
No.
It's not as if it's yeah.
He was a very zealous typography sort of guy. He was given that one job. It's like, right, you're just doing the text for the album, and he was just swinging his dick everywhere.
E's were his favorite letter. Just I gotta make this E prominent.
And surely, just looking at it, you'd have shrunk it down a little bit more just so it clears that back tower.
Why would you cut it into the tower? Yeah,
because it's just missing it. You wouldn't want to leave it on a tangent. You just bring it back a tiny bit, maybe reduce the size of that fucking massive E in the middle. I don't know, but I think
it's hilarious. A group of illustrators are shitting on a typographer, so we're hanging up on
who knows? Yeah. Sorry, whoever you are, but it's just. But that's a thing where I see that, and I just think oh, that's old, or that was so that was either done very quick. Or it's so not modern, those choices.
It's got the charm, doesn't it?
It's charming. Yeah,
definitely. Yeah.
Because the style of the piece, in terms of what it's done, it almost reminds me of a simpler version of Roger Dean and Rodney Matthews style fantasy art, but a bit less ability on the ability scale, but darker tonally in terms of what it's about. Just because it isn't your typical death metal cover, really. Like you say, Shindy, the colors as well, but even just the style of it drawn, because it's not line art. It's not like Riddick, for example, who does that like very much miserable dark line stuff, but it's also not painty. It's that maybe watercolor and pens or something. I can't quite tell. But,
yeah, exactly. There's definitely a bit of watercolor in there. Yeah.
You'd see the paper texture
from Yes. That's what it looks like to me.
Yeah. So, but it's still rad. I actually really love that color of logo. That sort of one flat goldish
the
thing
muted
in the sky.
gold is great.
Very muted gold. Yeah, I love it. Yeah.
All right, what we got next? Oh, this bad boy.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
So I chose this after seeing it was one of Lee's choices, and I there's so many covers that were just so influential as you were growing up as an illustrator, or even just as a metal fan, and you kind of, some just fall by the wayside just from you then filling your brain with like far more recent pieces that have come out since. But yeah, when he mentioned this, I remember seeing this again in like a music magazine or something. I never had the CD, but I was just like, that is so brutal. But the detail, the anatomy is actually really great, and I think it's one of Vincent Locke's best pieces.
Yeah.
Because I find some of his other pieces are very loose in terms of anatomy and the line work, but here, I don't know, man. Everything's just got its place, and it's just really well done. You can see the sort of the pelvic bone and the guts intertwined in there, and the skin. It's just really intricate for Vince Locke. I've not seen anything quite as intricate since. I mean, there's stuff that's very grim, but in terms of values and composition, this is the most dynamic for me.
Well, this is Eaten Back to Life. I mean, he had a little more of a painterly style, I feel like, than what he's produced more of as of late, which I still love. I love all his work. I'm a big fan. And I hope to have him on the show one time too. But dude, for me, it's those subtle blues that just make this thing, dude.
Yes.
There's something sickly about them.
They help balance all of the warms of the reds and the flesh, and it makes them more sickly because of the blues.
Yeah. It's that kind of that juxtaposition that just really adds more to the body horror of it. It's just, I
love the curtain of babies. Like I want like a button up shirt with that as like a texture on it. Just all the hanging babies,
like a bowling shirt.
Yeah. It's just like it's such a great piece of like it doesn't need a background. Like all those shapes and everything work perfectly for what it is.
There's distance there as well, which I don't feel you get in some of his other pieces. Like, some of the very far back pieces are a bit darker. Like the very far like fetuses are a bit darker, and then you've got the really bright bodies in the foreground. And you look at like
going back.
And you look at like Vile and even Eaten Back to Life, it's great, but it's still quite flat. I just find there's something a bit more dynamic about this cover.
Like this and Tomb of the Mutilated are probably my favorite.
Yeah, I agree.
They're both kind of similar, where it's a bit more on a plane and looking. It's at a slight angle, and there probably was Tomb of the Mutilated after this.
Yeah, it was the year after.
Okay, so it feels around that same time, and this is just
91 and 92, maybe, was that right? I think.
Yeah,
maybe.
Yeah, you're right, and it was the one straight after, and again, it's got that bluey sort of hue in there as well. It's just so brutal, but and the face of the character on the right, where it's like this maniacal sort of shock and horror. It's not even like a gleeful horror. It's just something just super depraved. Just
the tilt of the angle and like how the one shoulder's up. There's like a subtlety to it that really.
And the knife going in that way, so you can almost see like, oh, he's gonna pull this way.
It's butchering, isn't it? It's butchering. It's not stabbing. It's a big difference.
And there's almost like a hesitation in the eyes. There's like an almost like just maniacal almost. It's really hard to describe. And even the anatomy, you see the shoulder on the character on the left, the way the shoulder rips into the chest muscles. It's just really, really well done.
Cannibal Corpse covers are very much like as artists who work in the metal world. This is the dream job, to find a great client that has a great body of work, and they just want you every time.
Yeah.
Like this is a case where, like, if Cannibal Corpse reached out to me for a cover, not saying that they would, but if they would, I would almost be like, well, why aren't you using Vincent Locke? I want to see that. Like, that's the tradition.
It would have to be like, have a reason for him not to be able to do art anymore, whatever that would be, for them to stop using him, because it's so synonymous with the work, because he's been there from square one, which is why like there's no point in aspiring to work with Cannibal Corpse, because you, as a fan, you don't want to see that anyway, because it's so tied to Vince's work, which is, I can't think of too many examples of bands that've got a body of work.
Maiden, but then they lost sight of that.
But then, exactly. But this must be one of the bleakest conceptually conceived album covers ever. It's just so dark. I think my younger brother is a few years younger than me. He had this when he was about 11. Oh
boy.
And which is just, it's funny, like, because I think almost when you're that young, you can't even really picture the bleakness of it. It's almost silly because it's cartoonish. It's not, because it's not a realistic piece. But like, it really is a total shock.
Do you know what I like about this piece as well is, like, it's not overly it's not overly sexualized in a way.
That's for the next cover.
It's then it gets very sexualized and very explicit in that sense. But this is still it's body horror, but still very.
It's got that EC Comics sort of feel to it.
Yeah.
And I think this is the way that I've tried to say this to people before, and it's really difficult to convey properly. But I still want stuff like this to have a sense of fun and fantasy, rather than being genuine, bleak, realistic horror that actually puts you in that situation to fully imagine what that would be like. You want this to be surreal.
When we met up, Dan, we were talking about slam bands, weren't we? And about how the amount of slam bands that have hit me up and be like, we want a woman being cut in half from the vagina with a chainsaw, and it's just so gratuitous, and it's just, there's no room for any real artistic flamboyance in any way. It's just so grim, on the nose, just horrible, misogynistic as well. I just don't like it. It's just too much, That's right. And there's just a degree of more thought that has gone into this, and maybe primarily they were trying to shock. I don't necessarily know, but it doesn't feel like that it only relies on shock value to be good. And that is what I think the main thing here is that as a piece of art and a concept, it is very intriguing and successful and inspirational to a whole slew of artists and musicians and whatever have you. And I don't even I've had this record for decades and decades, but I think it was only really Tomb of the Mutilated where I started to prefer where Cannibal Corpse actually went musically. Sound-wise, for sure.
For sound, as a band, but still artistically as a cover, the impact to this one is phenomenal. And I think it would have been even bigger on the list if I listened to Butchered at Birth more regularly, but I don't really, because I prefer the sound of where they went from Tomb onwards. But iconic for sure.
Yep.
I picked this one for your number 6. That's cool, Shindy.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah,
oh, wow. Interesting.
Yeah, so I was obviously maybe 14, 15 at the time when Slipknot came out.
Perfect age for that.
Yes.
Yeah. Same as me.
And seeing music videos, it was, we spoke about it before, Lee, it was Headbangers, what was it called?
Headbangers Ball.
Headbangers Ball. That was it. So that was when it was like late at night, past 10 p.m. at night, you would then see the really heavier sort of underbelly of metal and rock music. And I remember seeing the video for, I think it was Spit It Out from this album.
Yep.
And just at the time as well, I was always a big horror fan. So The Shining was one of my favorite horror films of all time, still is now. And the fact they played on The Shining in that video, and it was just, they were all in these really crazy costumes, super conceptual stuff. It was just fucking insane to watch. And then the music in itself was just absolutely insane. So when I first saw that, I then went into like HMV at 15 years old, had my first bit of pocket money where I was going to buy a CD myself. So it was this and Decapitated Nihility, which I bought just because the cover. It was like my first CDs that I actually bought. But when I took Slipknot Self-Titled home and I looked at like the inlays and all the photography that they got done, it was just so sick. It was just mind-blowing to me. I never saw anything like that. I'd seen obviously painted artwork that was very conceptual and very grim, but seeing something so theatrical being played out in reality was just something I'd never seen before. You know, you'd see, you know, obviously like David Bowie, Alice Cooper, they'd wear makeup and it would be very theatrical, but something so in the realm of horror was just something that was so inspirational to me as an artist. So I actually started out by hand copying a lot of the inlay images and the photography here with pencils when I was in school. So I'd always be in the back of class, like drawing it. And I got it to a point where it was, you know, getting pretty good. And I had like friends that would then notice it. And that's how I actually made my first set of friends in school, was because of me drawing Slipknot.
Dude.
and them saying, have you heard this band? And then blowing up from there, you know? So
it was such a big thing for our generation though, you know? Like, dude, I was the exact same. Found this stuff when I was like in 6th grade. And then, you know, this is like right past dial-up internet, but there were like all these like Slipknot fan sites and stuff. I'd like look it up and stuff. And like, this was like the gateway band, you know, like
definitely.
And I know, you know, people will shit on them and whatever. But the music that hits you when you're like 11 to like 15, you can't deny it, that it like just seeps into you. And this was our generation.
Yeah. For a lot of kids, this was their first time hearing like blast beats.
Oh yeah.
And they're kind of wondering like, whoa, how is he doing that? And then they probably find out like, oh, well, this is like a staple in death metal that these guys totally listen to, but they're doing something different with it.
And if you look at their song structures, they had a pop sensibility in terms of verse, chorus, verse, breakdown, like really well structured songs that was super heavy. Like that was the first time I heard triple time double kick drums. And I was just like, what the fuck is this? Yeah. Like, it was so cool, so inspirational.
This is a case of like you're not drawn to this necessarily because of like the tangible, like the feeling like, oh, like an artist painted this. It's purely aesthetic. It doesn't really have to do with like the technical ability that went into portraying this likely just like altered photo and then with a bunch of textures on top of it. It's more vibes based than anything. So like that's where you can just pull inspiration from anything.
And even from a design point of view, the stuff like the textures and the grit that they added, like the Xerox effect and all the inlays that they then added, it was very, you could tell they put a lot of thought into it. You know, it was very design orientated, which was just super inspirational, super intricate when you look at it in that sense.
Yeah. Thanks for picking that, man. So going a little bit back to the 80s here, but we have, you know, how can we not have this, right? Holy Diver. So
this is number 8.
Well, year of my birth.
Yeah, I know.
83.
The interesting thing about this is I haven't read it recently, but apparently like they did take all these reference pictures, especially of the preacher, and the guy like almost drowned because they did like chain him up and they like made him like be out there like floundering around. And they're like, all right, finally.
I want to see those pictures. I want to see that photo shoot.
But yeah, there's an interesting article about like the creation of this, but yeah, Wendy Dio came up with the concept, and then there's an original drawing by a guy named Gene Hunter, and then the final painting was by Randy Barrett. So it was very much kind of like a assembly line to create it. But I think with this one, technique-wise, it's well executed. It's not master level, but damn, is that an awesome, iconic composition. You know, that's the importance of composition right here.
Color choices are really cool.
Yeah, I mean it's flawless just because that first conceptualness and you know, getting the right thumbnail and just making those early decisions that mean so much. That's what makes the painting so good, in my opinion, not the hours of rendering, which I think is a good reminder. Like when we were talking about our own work, I think that's what made a lot of those pieces from you guys so successful, is that first, or that decision of this is what the composition is going to look like. So,
well, and that's where, like, early on, if you can nail a composition and know that, like, oh, this is strong as is, then you're going to help yourself out so much later on, where you know, you got to make it look sexy in terms of colors and everything. But if it doesn't work on like the basic sketch composition level, you're going to be shooting yourself in the foot, because later on you're going to be like, oh man, now I got to fix a bunch of problems that I didn't fix way early on. Yeah. But this is a case where just like flawless execution of a concept, and an inherently cheesy concept too.
Oh, it's so heavy metal, isn't it?
Yeah, and even with the demon doing the hand signal, like like that's obviously that's Dio's thing. But like, if I had a band describe this to me, I'd be like, oh come on guys, like, you know, let's dial it back a little bit. But this is so like of its time and perfect for Dio that like I wouldn't have it any other way.
I love to see that the chain whip goes off the page and then comes back. That's like a smart move.
Yeah.
Then it allows that depth. Go ahead.
Yeah, there's something quite expressive about the way it's done that doesn't make it cheesy. You know, like the anatomy is really great on the demon. The multiple light sources is really cool, and just like the flow of it is really interesting. It could be so much more static and cheesy. You know, if like you say, if it was in black and white writing, you can imagine it being very just static and boring and very cheesy for sure, but it's done really well in a really cool, expressive, dynamic way, which I really like.
It looks like gouache. Like I wonder.
I like our gouache for sure.
Like it like looking at the way the demon is rendered, like it almost looks like Alex Ross type style. But the mountains are very not that. But the way that the priest and the demon look very much like something like Alex Ross would do in terms of his like realistic approach to like superhero stuff.
I just bought the first two Kingdom Comes today, so I think it's funny you mentioned that.
Oh yeah,
those are great. Go ahead, Shindy.
Yeah, the choice of having, I mean, I don't know if it was deliberate, but having deep black where it needs to be deep black, and then just having a washed out black, which is what actually I never thought about before you mentioned it, James. And something that I'm very guilty of is using a jet black just to fill it in and make it seem really dark and gloomy. But this is a perfect example, as well as your work, where it doesn't have to always be jet black. You know, just it needs to be where it needs to be. Super cool, very confident.
This is a awesome cover, so I'm only gonna lovingly pick apart this, right? But there's something interesting that I just noticed, which relates to something I didn't mention earlier when we're talking about tentacles. I'll briefly pick on that in a second. But if you look at the chain, right, which is going to hit him, it's the same size of chain links as around the kind of the thing that he's wearing. Right. But if you look at the size of the chain, like that demon in the background is millions times the size of the mountains, so you would expect those chain links on his wrist to be like minuscule, but they're only kind of like half the size. So like it doesn't matter because it's an awesome piece, so why would anybody ever look into it? But if you think about it,
I never noticed that.
Way wrong. The only reason I thought about this is because, again, just very quickly as a cutaway, hardest thing about tentacles is when you have to draw foreshortening, but a tentacle, it gets thinner the more towards it gets to the end, but if the end is coming towards you, it wants to get bigger and thicker. So what you can get stuck in is a tentacle just looking all the same width. And I know this because I've recently done a cover that was...
You've just got a noodle going towards you.
That's right. Because the foreshortening in perspective is at odds with the anatomy of something that's like that changes in its width as it gets towards you. Whereas obviously a chain link like this, or the whip chain, it should have a finite or a defined size of each of the links. So therefore, it should get incrementally smaller. You're not having to worry about it getting bigger and fatter. So it's just really interesting that if you think about it,
this is a case where it may be technically wrong, but artistically it's fine.
Exactly, yeah. And I find the more you love something, the more you like to pick apart. So Terminator is one of my favorite films in the world, and I love the picking apart the bits because you've looked at it so much and know how good it is that it's almost more fun to think, oh, that doesn't work, that doesn't work, that doesn't that doesn't work about it. And
despite its flaws, it works.
Exactly. And I'd never even noticed or considered that about this character before, because that probably only makes him about twice the size of a normal human if you sort of factor in the size of the chain.
Really small mountains.
Yeah, it's either really small mountains or like the priest is very big.
Very big. Yeah, that's right. Anyway, sorry about that.
Oh no, that's totally fine.
You just ruined heavy metal forever, and I'm gonna make a clip of this. I'm gonna make that the only thing I'm gonna highlight. I'm fucking with you.
Yeah, now I would need to look at the Last in Line cover and see if there's anything like that there.
That's another killer one, isn't it? Same with the Purple Moon one. Forgot the name of it. Just escaped me. But yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if Randy did Last in Line too, but he might have.
What's the third album called? I like the cover on that one a lot.
Is that the one?
Here, I have it right here.
Is that the one that's sort of the demon crouching down with which is pink and purpley and the moon, or are you thinking about the one with the bed?
It's got some greens in it, I think. I can't find it. Maybe I have it in my other room. Not a big deal. Let's go to the next one.
Dream Evil? That's the bed one.
And that's what I was talking about. Dream Evil, yeah.
That's the one with the bed with him looking through the window. And then Master of the Moon is the one holding the demon holding the globe that's all pinky and purple and blue. Super fantasy.
Yeah. All right. So for my next pick, this is the first non-metal pick, but I love Roger Dean.
Oh,
and this album is just so iconic looking. And, it's interesting. You look at the wave shapes. You kind of see a little bit of similarities there too.
Very
but
expressive.
Man, I mean, I love the color scheme. Roger Dean, I've seen his work ever since I was a kid, so it's just like part of that memory. And then just in terms of execution on this, sometimes I can tell like his stuff is just like really well done watercolor, but with this one, it's a little more of a mystery to me, like on exactly how he executed it.
Yeah.
And just like, I love covers that it's one really strong, iconic image. And that is kind of where you're going all of your attention to. And then I love stuff that has really good kinetic energy. So that obviously is part of it too. So just super iconic, maybe a little bit dorky pick, and definitely not metal. And the music is, it is what it is. But
I did try it, Lee, and I'm sorry I couldn't do more than a track.
I don't blame you, dude. The heat of the moment, man. I mean, this is definitely a dorky pick, but
like it's the cover is the logo, like it's the pyramid. It's so leaning cool right into that and accentuating it, even though like I'm not in love with the rendering on the logo. The 3D element of it, like the shape of that logo, the art, like they totally work with each other. And
the design of the logo design is really clever. That pyramid, and Roger Dean's logo designs is super cool as well. Really recognizable.
It's actually the apex of the entire illustration as well. Nearly. I mean, if you look at the edges, it still all really fits in really well, and color-wise, it ties it in really nicely as well.
Yeah.
And you got anything to say about Asia's music to defend the honor? Shindy doesn't like it.
I can't think of anything other than Heat of the Moment, so
that's the big one.
I know.
I love the covers.
I know the likes of Soul Survivor, and there was about 3 or 4 4 singles off that first album. I don't really know the rest of their stuff, but that 4 singles off that album were pretty big. But Heat of the Moment's obviously the classic. But I mean, I think for a lot of people, Asia kind of typified what happened in the 80s when a lot of the 70s prog bands split up and went commercial, which is why its popularity was in the mainstream, but it maybe got it kind of got the goats up for the people who were formerly into that 70s prog, like Yes and what have you.
Oh, King Crimson with John
King Crimson.
Yeah,
that's right. Yeah, but yeah, Roger Dean though, so it rules. I love the flow of his dragon as well. Like just the way that he makes the lines move is so cool. Like, and totally Roger Dean-esque.
Well, it's interesting how far back that the tip of the tail on the left side. If you really see it, it like goes really far into the horizon line there, which is kind of an interesting choice.
The really bright white waves when they actually crash is just a really confident choice as well. I would agonize over having, all the little spaces between the different bits of splashes, but he's just, super
it's
confident.
Just flat white, it looks like.
Yeah.
He has really strong silhouettes and forms in his work, though. Like I think a lot of his thing is you could silhouette like the 3 or 4 different elements in Roger Dean's work and just put them as flat 4 colors, and they're super strong.
That's another thing that I think like I'd try to, especially since we do, some of our stuff lands on like shirts and stuff. So like finding good looking shapes and silhouettes that translate from a distance, or even with like patches. Or pins, stuff like that is something I've started to think more about, where it's like, okay, how does this look if you simplify it to it's just like a black shape and a white background or something, and like, does it translate? Does it work? Is it an interesting shape? Like,
I think it's a super important thing how stuff works in silhouette, really, because that's what, especially when band logos or album covers get reduced to tiny little things on a flyer or a poster, it needs to be bold even in its smallest form.
This is something I never thought about before as well, is looking at the thumbnail of a cover that you've done and making sure it all translates, and you have got this centerpiece that is very distinctive as opposed to just merging in with everything else. That's something that I'd never really thought about before. Obviously you're thinking about values and making sure it's very distinctive at the time, but super really big point that I'm thinking about more so as I work now as well.
Nice. And then bring it back to metal. You
got
some Mark Wilkinson here, who did a lot of the later Judas Priest, and then eventually moved on to Iron Maiden. Did some Marillion stuff too. Master airbrush painter, but then he also used stuff with the brush as well. There are parts of this album cover that I don't like, frankly. I just fucking love the motorcycle creature. Like, it's just so creative.
I always wish that like the whole scene was brought upward a little bit.
Exactly.
So there wasn't so much blue on top.
Yeah, it's a little too heavy and too saturated. And the Painkiller font, I'm not crazy on, frankly. But I mean, damn, if that's not just a cool image, the way the wheel is with. It's obviously very like 80s and the kind of chromy, colorful effect. Very vibrant. I think I just love the unbridled like creativity of this image. Like, that is really what makes me excited by it.
To very heavy metal magazine cover.
Yeah.
I was about to say something similar, Shindy. To me, this is what Bat Out of Hell is, a kind of heavy metal to grands and mums and people who have an idea of heavy metal. This is like heavy metal Bat Out of Hell style cover in terms of like as in real metal. And like I think this is, if somebody asked me what is the most metal album of all time, it's Painkiller, because it's got everything you would expect from metals, from double kicks, like high pitched screams, songs about like the most cliched metal meltdown, and then it's got this cover that is just like cartoon metal in terms of what it actually depicts. And from that point of view, that's a success, right? If everything can be like the most metal thing there ever is. Like,
was Painkiller late 80s or early 90s?
It was
90. So this is around where Judas Priest was like, they had done Turbo. They'd had their slightly more commercial stuff. This is where it's like no, we're a fucking metal
We're
band.
back to metal.
Yeah.
But then they lost Halford, right? And then they had the 2 shit albums.
Yeah, but this is very much like, oh no, we are leaning, we are going all in on the metal stuff, and we're not trying to go for like stadium rock or anything. This is like hard hitting, fast stuff.
That's right. This was the first album with the drummer that they got from Racer X, which was like, shred band with Paul Gilbert and all that. And it meant that just this double kick, not like in the, decrepit birth sort of double kick, or anything, but like classic metal tempo, classic metal tempo double kick all the way through half the songs on it. And it just gave it that vibe. And I guess Pantera would have been about round the corner, and you could definitely tell that Judas Priest throughout the early 90s started to get into Pantera and a bit of Alice in Chains style stuff. But this was right before they wanted to be hard and tough, but weren't quite influenced by other things yet. So it was, for me, I mean, I'm sure a lot of the older people 10 years older than me would say it was sacrilege, but this is my favorite Judas Priest album because it's just,
a lot of people our generation say that.
Yeah,
I mean, it's funny. Like I discovered Painkiller through the Death cover.
Such a good cover.
Like I kind of prefer the cover, but like I didn't realize that Judas Priest did the original one when I heard that one. Then I went back to this record. I was like, oh man, I haven't heard Judas Priest sound this hard. This is great.
I'd have quite liked to have heard that era of Death cover just all of Judas Priest's Painkiller, quite frankly, because Chuck, like, you didn't realize that Chuck had a voice that could sing scream that high until he does at the end of Painkiller. It's unreal.
Yeah,
so good. But the album after that, or maybe one or two after, Jugulator, which is when they got Ripper in after Halford left, I think is really underrated and has got a lot of like a real toughness to it, and like tuned down guitars when they went down to maybe C sharp and were playing kind of proper stompy, sort of Pantera Machine Head ish riffs in it, but it kind of got a lot of and that had Mark Wilkinson art on it as well, that they absolutely,
but it's fucking pixelated.
They pixelated it.
Oh no,
it looks really bad.
Oh
shit.
So bad. It looks like they MS painted it. Like they reduced it to like a 300 or pixel thing and MS Paint, and then blew it back up. And it's criminal because the whole piece is actually wicked. But
it's like our worst nightmare. Someone just messing with the art. Like, oh no, that's my.
I don't know if you guys have seen it, but around this sort of time, Bernie Wrightson did some cover art for Meatloaf. But I can never find the actual release. It's not on Spotify. I could never see the cover there. But
did he do the one with the ship?
I'm not too sure. Like I was actually just looking just then to see which ones he's done, but I don't think any of them are on Spotify. But unless it was like maybe a faked meme or something. But it was like a ship. It was like a ship with like bat wings or something.
Sails. Yeah.
But it's like Bernie Wrightson is just one of my absolute heroes as well. So I remember seeing that and be like, "What he's done? He did that for Meatloaf." Like, just
Meatloaf had Whelan and Corbin.
Yeah,
Meatloaf has the best album covers of all of them. Really.
Yeah. Like all the Bad Out of Hell covers are just absolutely insane.
Oh, that's so good. Yeah. Bernie Wrightson.
All right, James, I put this for your number 8. I'm gonna step out for a second.
That works.
Sick.
Yeah, so like this was a case where like as a like slowly getting into metal version of me, which probably was 11, 12, still like predominantly listening to like Metallica as the heaviest stuff. But once I started seeing, like, I think the initial thing that got me was I love that old Amorphous logo. I think it's just like one of the coolest logos of that era. But the artwork is so like expressive. I could almost see like where they're like just spreading around the paints with it.
Very expressionist,
very
abstract,
and then choosing to be like detailed just in very particular parts. It's a little like a Dave McKean, if you guys have ever seen his work.
I love Dave McKean.
Burn My Eyes, Paradise Lost.
Yeah, so like this she did a bunch of the covers for Incantation in the early days. So like if you see those old covers, they're very similar with the very dark blacks, but also like a bunch of areas where it's super just like expressionistic and all about just like big swipes of black and red. And I think with this, it's like, you know, nothing like my style, but I just remember it in terms of like the expressiveness of it coupled with like one of my all-time favorite logos, to where I was just like, it was a classic effect of like, I have to see what this sounds like. Let me listen to this right now. And the rest of her work is phenomenal too. An example of like a fine artist, like a gallery artist who ended up doing a lot of metal work.
The photorealism of the battle at the bottom as well, like the soldiers and everything, like the Crusaders and stuff. There's such a realism there, like, but with the, again, like you say, the really big open strokes and really expressive, messy but very deliberate expressionist elements there. It's just really sick.
That logo takes up like 40% of the color. It's like,
yeah, that's the other thing. I can't see what's going on behind there.
It's like, and the thing is, it's a logo that could be reduced, because it's not like it says amorphous, where it's like, you know, it's 1,000 letters that needs to take up. They've actually gone, wow, let's put this, but it kind of still works with the
it really works,
which is amazing.
That's a case where like enough of the top half is like vague to where you can kind of cover it up and you're fine.
And it adds to the horror of the battle. It just, you can't distinguish what's going on in at the top there, but it just seems like a mix of bandages and blood and rock and just, it's just insane. Super sick.
Yeah, her work's great.
Cool pick.
Oh yeah, so this one it's kind of like it's admittedly a more recent one that I've discovered, but one that I was like, why have I never seen this? Like, this seems like one of those things that should be on every single like greatest heavy metal album covers ever list, but I've never seen it before, just because it strikes me as something that's super recognizable and iconic, but from a very like underrated, if not well known at all, like metal band from the 80s. And like this was a case where like finding the artist's other work is actually really difficult to find. But like the only other stuff that I remember seeing was like he did some stuff for her, Halloween. But it wasn't like Keeper of the Seven Keys or anything. It was some of their other stuff. But and it doesn't really look like this. So this it felt very much like maybe got very specific direction from this piece. But this is a case of like extremely bold shapes and designs, to where like I could see a statue being made of this.
It almost reminds me of Mobius. It has like a Mobius quality to it.
I can see that.
Sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, it reminds me of like Sad Wings of Destiny by Judas Priest, but not quite. Like it was like an amalgam of Judas Priest album covers, but none of them in particular. But sorry,
like the style of the figure is a little bit screaming for vengeance, but like the rest of the rendering isn't that at all. And it's so minimal with its colors. It's very monochromatic, and I look at pieces like this and I think like, okay, you can really be that simple and well defined with the shapes of everything, and you know, when you zoom in, it's not like crazy detailed or anything, but still look like a lot is going on. Like this is a case where I can see, you know, you can easily, like if somebody told you to draw that in 5 seconds, you can easily get it across all of the different elements, no big deal. And I think it's just something that I appreciate as somebody who does make covers and tries to find some sort of like iconic piece of design to incorporate in whatever piece I do, how much just a big, powerful image is important. Because I had never heard of this band. I like the album. It's a solid album from this era, but
so what are they like musically?
A very like traditional heavy metal type stuff around the 80s. So
like American power metal, traditional metal, where it's not like really fantastical. It's real power to it.
They're German, apparently.
It is one of those cases where I just like I stumbled upon it in a YouTube compilation. It was like that's one of the coolest covers I've ever seen.
Make a sick shirt, man.
Yeah, I want that on a shirt. Which is probably the biggest like praise I can give to an album cover. Like give me a product with that on it, please. I want to wear it.
It's sick.
Yeah, but don't really know much about the band or the artist, but like this piece is stuck with me. To where like I just it's on my Pinterest board of like, you know, inspirations, just to be like, oh, look what you can do, you know, look how you can figure unique like big bold designs into compositions.
To have something that bright but dark at the same time, just you can just see how confident they were. They were just like really big silhouettes in the middle of this big molten lava explosions, and really cool.
It looks like very quickly, it looks like the Halloween album they did was better than Raw, which I was wondering about because I bought that album in '98 because of the cover. And
that's this guy.
So there you go. Like, so it's the same. It looks like it's the same person because stylistically, Better Than Raw is way more saturated and modern and looks a bit more digital. But the style of cartooniness is the same. So it could be that. Anyway, there you go. Sorry, it was just checking up because there's not much about it. Like, it passed me by completely.
It's hard to find his stuff. I don't know where to find it.
Last thing I was thinking on this one is it reminds me of that one part of Fantasia. The movie,
yes,
I watched when I was like a kid. I think of Fantasia.
Yeah. The demon rising up out of the
exactly.
Yeah.
Like if I could probably put like just a number one thing that's influenced me as an artist that made me want to like be an artist, like that whole sequence is like, you know,
definitely.
If I had a top 5, that's like 1 or 2.
And then Stravinsky too. It's like real eerie. Oh,
it's amazing. I love it. Then of course,
I actually see a similarity here.
I think something in a lot of my stuff that you'll find. I love painting fire. I love like these big, flowy, warm colors that just add like a nice dynamic sense of direction and flow to pieces. Even with like a static figure like this, it gives it some motion and real power behind it.
Super high contrast as well.
Yeah, like and this is also very Chernobog. This is very Fantasia. Like that hand is straight out of it.
Definitely.
This is a case of like there really isn't much to it, but it is beyond iconic.
Totally.
And just because it's executed so well. If I would want every album cover to look like this.
It's got the oranges in it that you've done quite a bit, like the yellows and oranges that you've got a bit as well. It's not just the fire, but it's that warmth that comes from stuff as well. And it's what I'd call arty fire as opposed to realistic fire, which doesn't really look like that. But
fire is so hard to paint and replicate in terms of just painting and even drawing. Like, how do you draw and paint fire? It's so tough.
And
it needs to be playful. It needs to be abstract in a way.
It's like hair, where you can like it's all about finding the right chunks that make it look flowy, but you can easily make it look like it's very static. It's weird.
It looks cooler when it's not realistic as well.
Yeah,
it's almost too boring and real when it looks like how it actually looks. So if you do something more impressive with it, it's just more arty and stuff. More impressive visually.
And this obviously just being like, you know, a killer album. On top of the art, it's a case where again, I want that mask. I want to hang it on my wall. I want to like light it from the back. I just like albums like this are very much something where like I think they work best when like you can know absolutely nothing about it and just look at that and be like, okay, yeah, I want to listen to that, or that just looks cool on my wall. And this just happens to be a absolute like iconic record.
But there's so much to the imagination too. Like I don't know how the full figure looks.
No,
you only know roughly what you see, and then you kind of just fill in the
rest
gaps.
of your imagination. Yeah.
I almost don't want to see it.
Exactly.
Yeah. Super iconic as well. Like, again, very stripped down to the bare minimum, but so much is communicated in that small amount of like space. It's just super sick. Very atmospheric.
You can't. It's like a 10 out of 10 cover, isn't it? In terms of achieving everything that you want to do. And
it doesn't need anything more.
It doesn't, no. And again, it helps when it's tied to an absolute banging record as well. Like, there's the combination of that again. Like, but yeah.
Technically speaking, as well, the anatomy isn't perfect, it isn't great, but just the lighting and just the choices in contrast and just the power of that image. It actually doesn't matter. It communicates exactly what it wants to communicate. That hand is all sorts of different proportions, but because it's rendered so well and so cool, you don't care.
And if you think about, that's his left arm, right? His left arm is where's it going to be coming from? Like his right hip? Like it doesn't.
That's why it's better when you don't see everything.
Yeah, it's like, is he doing this? Like,
it's like, hello.
We're rooting this.
but this is the beauty of it, because where this is different than, let's say, Fistful of Metal by Anthrax, if you can picture that, where you go, that doesn't make sense, but is very interestingly executed, like, let's say, whereas this is so badass you don't ask those questions until a bunch of nerds like ourselves come on and overanalyze something that doesn't necessarily need to be done. But that's the beauty of stuff like that, is if it can actually have shortcomings but still is a massive success on every level, that you don't care about the chain link sizes or the fact that the arm isn't coming from the right place. It just looks sick
because nobody else is thinking about that. They're just thinking about the initial
impact.
Us.
Exactly. Yeah.
All right, Dan, number 5.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I appreciate where sort of the time is going on, so I won't drag this one out. But I had to choose a Dan Seagrave one, and I'm not even necessarily saying this is his best or my favorite. Although
I wouldn't even say that was Dan Seagrave. That's insane.
He changed his style a lot, like as in probably from the mid 90s onwards. Like, so this would have been like early 90s, this one, or maybe 93, 91, I guess. But like, it's a really interesting perspective. It's really nice and detailed, and a lot of the album covers that he did around this time, like obviously Left Hand, the spoilers and that, Left Hand Path and Gorguts Considered Dead, and what have you, like they were just really captivating and not necessarily always otherworldly, but at the same time slightly otherworldly. And this one, obviously, you've got that what's it called, the sort of the planetary oh god, I've forgotten the name of that,
the thing in the center,
planetarium thing or whatever it is in the middle, that's obviously got some sort of mystical powers and some sort of maybe magical relation to the ancients, which all sounds very spirity and Lovecraftian, but it doesn't really matter. It was more, this album is unbelievable musically, and I think the art's awesome, and I wanted to speak more about Dan Seagrave rather than this specific piece, because he, out of all the people, I find really hard to pick favorites from, because like he did all the early Malevolent Creation stuff, which was wicked, and as he got better, as he has done over the years, I found his albums to have a little less uniqueness to all of them, because he's found his thing of doing twisty landscapes with human structures and whatever. Whereas in this time, he was doing what seemed to me more like bespoke commissions that differed greatly from cover to cover. And his early ones like Left Hand Path and Altars of Madness are probably technically some of the weakest ones, but all it took him was a year or two, from like 89 to 91, to really find his groove and become excellent. And all the stuff that he did from 91 onwards, I think is like really cool. And he does rooms really interestingly, and that's not where like, you know, landscapes are interesting and people and monsters can be interesting, but he would actually just make the inside of a room look interesting, and that is a very, very difficult skill. So I don't need to speak about this for any particular length of time, but I just wanted to get Seagrave in the mix because he had to be from my personal sort of level.
Totally.
And this was
so cool to see. Like, I hadn't seen this piece before, and I never would think Seagrave. Whereas, like, nowadays, if somebody says, like, oh, I'm getting the Seagrave cover, you probably know exactly what you're going to get.
Yeah.
It'll be amazing, but you know roughly what you're going to get. With this, it's like, okay, like, this, I think, you know, it gives a little bit of comfort to us artists knowing that, like, you know, you've got room to experiment, grow, figure out your style. And you don't have to have like one thing that, like, that's what I do and I have to do that forever. Yeah. Like, this is a case of, like, the client needed a thing, so he did a thing and he rocked it. But it's not obviously him, but that's, like, fascinating.
There's like a stillness to it, you know? That's really cool. It's like, it's silently disturbing. And then I gotta say, man, I love the, like, X-Men looking Pestilence logo. Like, it just, I immediately think of, like, Wolverine for some reason. Yeah, I love that shit.
That album musically is phenomenal as well. He did the next one, Spheres, and he did loads of stuff back then, like all the Suffocation albums and like Gorguts, like I mentioned, and Edge of Sanity. They had some really cool album covers. And to me, like, my favorite era of Seagrave is probably sort of that 91 to 95 era, where those, and maybe you tie it a lot to the music, but that's where technically I thought it was excellent, but each cover was different from one to the next, and
very different.
My favorite cover of his, but it wasn't 80s and 90s, so I didn't include it, was the Rivers of Nile album, Where Owls Know My Name. And I think that's because I love the purple logo against the green, and also the album is so good, and I can't separate the music from the art, because is it the fact that the album is so good that makes me think that that's one of his best covers, or is it just the other way around? I'm not entirely sure. Maybe it's just the amalgamation of both, but he's just had, like, he's one of the absolute goats, really, isn't he, in terms of consistency and quality. And even though he's found a niche of, he does what he does, so if you want buildings made of bodies in that landscape, that's what he does. He had decades before of doing all these different things to get to that point, and love his work.
For sure.
That's it. It was tough to pick one, but so if anyone wants to say anything, feel free. But I don't need to dwell on that for too long. I just want to get
just to echo what James said, just the comfort that knowing that we didn't all have it figured out coming out of the door. Like, we were all still experimenting at the beginning before we found that really distinctive style. It's just really cool to see, and just to see that there's still a crazy amount of imagination here as well, and idea of concepts that he's just, like, smashed out of the park. He's done such a good job of this, and I'm just so amazed that this is Dan Seagrave. I've never seen this piece before. I've never seen anything like it. It's really cool.
Yeah, the geometry and the lighting's all great, and if you're a fan of death, you know, this is like perfect prog death metal, like early tech death metal, that's not in the kind of overly ridiculous complex tech death of today. It's like that progressive stuff that, honestly, it's a 10 out of 10 album, well worth checking out if you like that stuff.
Nice.
Oh, we're on to me. Yeah, forgot. I was what a great choice, one of you guys.
I've never seen this album cover. Like, what is this?
Yes, this is you could pick any of the Rig stuff for me, from Killers up to even, it's not a great album, but No Prayer for the Dying is still a cool album cover. But this, to me, is probably the perfect one in terms of being absolutely iconic. I know people would maybe point to Number of the Beast, but I think Number of the Beast is overrated. Both the album cover and the music, it's absolute peak iconicness, because style-wise it's iconicness, and it had 3 or 4 singles of it that were just absolute god tier Maiden songs. But Power Slave just had a bit more to it than meets the eye, and just the sense of scale you get once you look a little bit further down and realize the size of the people walking up this huge monument to Eddie. Just the use of the colors, the way that. And I was chatting to the guys from Bangers and Mosh podcast the other day about this album, basically saying that the album to me feels like it's got an Egyptian vibe all the way through it, even though it doesn't. It's like a few riffs in Power Slave, but it's because the cover is so strong, it sucks you into a world that doesn't even really exist beyond the song Power Slave itself.
Great point.
Like it starts with Aces High. It has nothing to do with Egyptian anything.
Exactly.
But I think Power Slave when I hear that song.
That's right, and you tie it to that the cover, don't you? And it's one of the ones where Eddie isn't the main focus, but structure and statues are the main focus, which is almost the opposite of every other sort of Maiden cover that I can think of off the top of my head. But you still get all of Eddie's form and his glory by being the main of the 3 or 4 whatever statues either side. But yeah, I think this is the one where I would say objectively it's the best. My favorite is Somewhere in Time because it's got all the Easter eggs and you'd spend hours looking at it. But I think just as a piece of art, this one's spectacular.
Yeah, phenomenal. Like, yeah, my favorite too. Easy. No
very
problem.
Iconic. Yeah.
Well, no strong darks either.
No,
it's like all the
cover.
shadow is really, it's a pretty light color at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And the sense of lighting is actually really cool. It's like the lighting's coming from the left and casting onto the right, but the lighting still feels very symmetrical in a way, just because of the composition and the structure and everything. It's just really well done. It's super intricate.
It's cast really nicely, like you say, that it's the light that makes this, because you could make that really boring and flat, but the light is in all the right places. It carves out the pyramid and all the bits, the structure within really well, and all the stuff at the bottom around either to the bottom left and the bottom right, or the little bits of the offset doors, which again, it's those little doors that give it the sense of scale when
adds to the realism of it all, because I think if it was all top-down lighting, it would just seem very celestial and ethereal. But I think because it is like a very realistic left to right lighting, where the lighting itself isn't symmetrical but the structure is, just adds to the realism of it and the impact of it, because you can really imagine being there. And really well done.
And I mean, again, this one for me was as much of a vehicle to talk about Derek Riggs, who to me, if you had to pick who is responsible for the best metal album covers of all time, I think him, the creation of Eddie, and mascots would have existed before that, but Eddie is the de facto leader of metal mascots and heavy metal album covers. And I got into this entirely through seeing Maiden before even hearing them, because of their album covers, and I was like, that looks awesome, it's got to sound awesome. And you get into Maiden first, and I can't be alone as far as artists go that spent their entire school doodling Eddie on covers. And it was because of Eddie and Vic Rattlehead as well from the Megadeth side of things, but predominantly Eddie, that was like, I want to do heavy metal album covers, and that's my favorite thing ever. And I think probably have my entire enjoyment of the music and the art and everything just because of Eddie and Derek Riggs. So in some ways it feels like he should be number one, but
I mean, like every band after, especially if you're like in the traditional heavy metal or very, very much the thrash metal vein, everybody wants their Eddie. They don't want a mascot, they want their Eddie, which is somebody who just like completely personifies the music and you can't take it away from the music. There's some who have tried and succeeded, many who have failed, but like it's very much everybody wants that. Like, how can we have our Eddie? That's just a part of our. He's not involved in the music or anything. Like it's to my knowledge, I don't think there's a song about Eddie. Like,
not as him,
but he's you can't take it away. So it's so specific to this and so very much the template. For how you do it.
And he's basically called dibs on all zombie skeleton style mascots, so you can do them. And I know, James, obviously we've worked on the likes of Patchy and stuff together, and then there's all these other ones, but Eddie kind of feels like, whether he was or wasn't the first, he feels like the first one and completed it to start with. So everyone else is just not quite as good a version of Eddie.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
All right, back to Seagrave.
Another Seagrave. Who'd have thought?
Yeah.
So actually, when I first listened to this album years ago, I didn't actually realize it was Dan Seagrave until pretty much doing the research for this, because it's like you can kind of see it's quite similar to Altars of Madness in terms of the way he's done the shading and everything. But in terms of the composition and everything, it's almost quite rigid. It's more rigid than a lot of the other pieces that he's done before. Like, it's very kind of straight, right angles and stuff, but just super immersive. And just the album, man, it just blew me away when I heard it. It was just, I'd never heard anything so defined as kind of metal, kind of thrashy grind, like just that guitar tone. It still stands the test of time to me right now. And it's so cool to hear bands that are trying to emulate that now, like, like Power Trip, Black Breath, even End to a certain degree, like that's really gritty guitar tone. And just, the music was just so sick. Like that opening track is just straight in, super heavy, super fast, just such a sick album. Like there's, on Spotify, they obviously have the highlight tracks, but there's not one bad track on that album. It's just so sick. And another thing that you pointed out before, Dan, was where you see an artist, they use the negative space. I never noticed this before, but I've literally just noticed it. There's a skull underneath the bridge that's made out of the vines. Can you see that?
Yeah,
It's a realist trick.
Yeah. I literally just noticed that. There's just so much to look at and that you pick out, but I just remember seeing this before. And when Black Dahlia Murder came out with, is it Ever Black? That was the blue cover.
It's Nocturnal.
Nocturnal, that's the one. Yeah, it brought me back to this album, and then I remember just listening to this again. Rather than, I love Black Dahlia Murder, don't get me wrong, but then it just reminded me of seeing this album cover and just listening to this, and it's one of those ones where a lot of my list is like sometimes the cover is more influential than the music and vice versa. But for me, this is like very equal parts. The music and the actual album are both very equally influential for me as a musician and as an illustrator as well.
He was like 19 or something, I think, when he painted this.
Come on.
Yeah.
Crazy.
So like Altars of Madness would have been, I think, as maybe his first sort of big one anyway. I kind of can't imagine doing anything before 89. So he'd have been like 18 years old when he did Altars of Madness, and then like 19, 20 when he did this.
Insane, man.
We can't all be Seagraves.
No.
That talented that early. Wow.
But
just a little hint of yellow on the little slime and the logo.
Well, and the decision to put the little bit of the magenta in the logo, the slight like very dark red to pop from the blue, and then the very odd choice of the petroglyph font for the title.
It's the
Papyrus. Yes, that's
Papyrus. That's the one.
Yeah, the Avatar font. But I can't see this cover without it. Like it's weird how things that are iconic suddenly just like you don't care about the imperfections.
There's so many faces in this as well. Like when you look on the right hand side, there's like, even you can see where the word path is. There's again more skeletal sort of faces there. Yeah. There's just so much to look at that you don't really take in until you really just sit there for hours and hours just soaking it in.
And it's such a weird composition too. Like the big opening under the bridge, like in that area. Then you got the tomb in the far left top of it, big tomb, and it's got like stuff to read on it. And you've got like a road winding back that's still like on the left side. Like everything flows kind of awkwardly, but
it's like, very angular, like and very static. But it's so
works.
Different.
Yeah, it's weird how like the like you don't. This is if this is like a 19-year-old, they're just doing likely what looks cool and what feels good to them. They're not really thinking too much about like all the dynamic quote unquote rules or anything. Like they're just doing something that they think looks cool. Like it's
a good point.
It works despite like some of the awkwardness of it. Like I wouldn't have it any other way. It looks great.
Yeah, it still has that sense of scale and distance, that, you know, background, middle ground, foreground, even though it is very like janky and angular and, you know, right angles and stuff. It's just, yeah. And again, musically, just that album is just so good. Like,
oh yeah,
I still listen to it, you know, every couple of months. I just sit there and front to back, just headbang. Like, it's just such a good album.
Oh,
yeah, cool. So this, I mean, in terms of the band, like, I really like Symbolic. That's one of my favorite albums of theirs. Like, I know there's probably a lot of purists that probably don't like that album quite as much. And this album, there's a couple of standout tracks, but for me, it was, again, the album cover was just crazy. I'd never seen anything so pulpy, and you can feel the heat in that environment. You know, you can feel the scorching heat of a desert, but yet it's, you know, like a pink, purple colors.
It's so pink.
Yeah, you put a robe on, you see the guy right now, man. You see him put a robe on.
There you go.
Yeah. That's it, yeah. It's just, yeah, such a good cover. Like, Repka, you know, like absolute king. Like, he's done so many sick album covers. But yeah, just, again, very simple when you look at it in terms of a composition. It's just you know, a very, very striking character in the front, and then just an environment with a couple of characters in the background. But the perspective is very pulpy as well. It's very 80s sort of horror angle, you know, where it's not kind of far back. It's very almost point of view, which I quite like about it.
Yeah, it looks like it would go on like an action figure box, where like you'd see the picture and then you see the little figure in the.
That's why he does so many Super 7 commissions now, man.
Yep, and it makes total sense.
Yeah.
Now I just associate those things.
Yeah, very simple, straight to the point, but yeah, I love it. So good.
It's amazing.
I was going to say, I'll speak on that one a little bit later, I think. So
Okay.
We might have a repeat.
All right, this is an interesting pick. I don't know if you guys seen this before.
Yes.
The original.
This.
Yeah, so
Robert Williams is amazing.
Yeah.
But this never gets seen.
Exactly.
That's crazy.
So this is the first Appetite for Destruction cover. Now, the painting was done before the album, and I believe the painting was actually called Appetite for Destruction, and then Guns N' Roses was like, I like the name of that painting, we'll make the album called that. If I'm not mistaken, I could be wrong on that story, but I know that they approached Robert Williams, and he was used to turning people down for album work, but he ended up letting him use it for this. But then because of the boob, I think, and just like the fact that it's a little odd, they eventually, got the more iconic cover that people are used to seeing. But I'm a huge Robert Williams fan. I mean, he's the founder of Juxtaposed magazine, which has helped out a ton of artists over the years. He's a visionary. He basically helped create that whole like lowbrow surrealism thing that
Todd Shore.
Yeah. I'm a huge fan of both those guys.
Yeah.
Like that's a big influence for me. And I just love how, once again, it's like amazing technique, but creativity above all. Like what is that thing that's like up above? And the fact that it's all one color, and there's definitely the comic book influence. I think I just love that, he's gotten to that level where he could imagine anything, and then he knows he can execute it. And it could sound completely bonkers, like if he wrote out what it was, but then it all just kind of coalesces together. So
the technical ability is just really insane. Like the level of detail and understanding of anatomy, lighting and shadow, and just the shadow that's cast onto the fence, which then just draws your attention to the top, is a really interesting choice.
And it's like translucent too. Like it's not once again, it's not solid black shadow. You can still see the fence through.
Yeah.
Smart.
Yeah,
I always preferred that. I had the tape for this when I was a kid, and because Guns N' Roses and Iron Maiden were kind of like the first two bands I was into, and I always thought that was such a cool cover that I couldn't believe it was on the inlay when the cover was just like the 5 skeleton heads.
Yeah.
But when you realize for censorship purposes or whatever reason, because obviously it's pretty bleak, that cover, you can understand why it maybe for commercial purposes it wasn't used as the front for cover, given how big Guns N' Roses ended up being. But yeah, it's a wicked piece.
Yeah, it's amazing. I've never seen it before. So this is mind-blowing to me that a band like Guns N' Roses even considered having this as their album cover art, even if it was short-lived. It's insane.
Robert Williams has some really good books. So if you collect books at all, I have one. I forget what it's called, but it has this painting in it and a ton of other ones. It's one of my favorite art books. All right, and then number 4, Derek Riggs again. Personally, this is my favorite for a lot of the same reasons, really, as Power Slave, and the fact that strong central image, a lot of cool soft edges, very surrealistic. I actually really like the font treatment on the Seventh Son. Like it has this kind of like good Arabian feel to it. Just like, I don't know. It's just, I've always been really captured by how this one just pops right off the page.
It's got so much of that negative space where a load of it is just blue, but it looks brilliant, which is a thing we were sort of touching when we were speaking about Celestial Sanctuary cover and what have you. It manages to do so much with such little, and it doesn't necessarily make sense. It's got those sort of floating light bulb things, but this really, that era of Maiden was definitely the most surreal, where it couldn't really, it's more mystical and evoking a weird kind of metaphor for stuff rather than actually being a bit more literal like their other covers were. But I love this one as well.
Like it matches the sound of the record. Like it feels a little
dreamy. The album with Can I Play With Madness?
Yeah,
that makes sense.
I think. I love the ripple on this one too. That ripple really makes it.
Yeah,
because now you know where it lands on the water. If you didn't have that, I feel like it would be quite a bit weaker, actually.
Yeah, like it's just kind of floating there. But then you've got like the crack in the water too, so the water is like a solid.
Oh yeah.
Like I could never tell if like it goes into like a little waterfall going down into the hole, or if it just is supposed to like look solid or something. But this is one of his like weirder covers, but it's so cool.
It's a bit like almost Dali Dream-esque, you know, like he sort of paints stuff in his dreams. It's a bit like that. And even down to the cracks in the water, it doesn't really make sense. But this and all the single art from this era, all of like the Can I Play With Magnus and Evil Let Men Do, that was all amazing, and it was really well themed as well. That and Power Slave stuff was just the art that went alongside the main art was all really, really good. I thought I had something else to say on that, but I can't remember what it was now. Never mind. Okay. Flower.
Oh, hell yeah.
Simon Bisley, absolute hero.
Yeah, so this is, Beasley was one of those guys, along with Frazetta, where I saw their work and was like, okay, I want to be an artist, and I want to, like, achieve, like, these sort of vibes. Not necessarily in like, like barbarians and big boobed women and everything like that. Just like this overall like sense of power and like heightened epic feel of things that it does feel a little barbaric, but also like totally works for the type of music that it's making. Or that it has to be accompanied with. This was a case of like, I'm not like in love with the record or anything, but I mean, I love early Danzig, but this was a case of like purely aesthetically, I want to strive for this. Like, I one of my things that like I'm sure we've got all of things that like our checklists of things that we would like to work on and strive towards. My thing is like I never draw women, and specifically like like sexy women. It's not that I would want to do it exactly like this, but it's I always envy those people who are able to just like draw kick-ass looking women, because I always find it very difficult to draw them.
Like Shindy.
Yeah, no,
master of drawing the female form right here in our presence, man.
Yeah, no,
I just like boobies. I like boobies and skulls. I can't help it.
I mean, you can't go wrong with boobies and skulls on album covers, and it's like the colors, the reds are like almost orange, and I love the odd placement of the text. This was a case of just like, it's that Frazetta adjacent approach to things.
This is where I get the really dark shadows, like the really stark top-down lighting from. Like, this is, what I always try to emulate in my work, is just really chiseled, like, anatomy, like you can see it's very expressive, the anatomy, the way he does it, but it's still very real in terms of shadow and lighting.
It's weird how like, and that's something that I try to remind myself too when approaching figures. Like, you don't necessarily have to like be anatomically correct. You just have to be aesthetically correct. This is a case where like she and him have muscles in places where I don't know where they're coming from and how they're being developed, but they work.
But the shadows are there.
Yeah. The poses and the way the lighting hits and the colors just makes it work, even though, she's got rib muscles that just aren't making a lot of sense, and he's got shoulder muscles that are looks like, are there scars, or are they just growing that way? Like it just looks so cool. And Beasley specifically always like had a more cartoony approach to things, but still would render it very realistically. And he would, do tons of stuff for Danzig, but also just Heavy Metal Magazine. And I'd highly recommend checking out.
Have you guys read 2000 AD comics?
There's that too. I haven't, but I know he's done a bunch of work for him.
It's like a lot of Americans don't know it, because obviously that 2000 AD comics never really got to the same status as say DC and Marvel. But I mean the artists and just the rotors of artists that they used to have were just so amazing. Bisley, his ink work as well was just as stark, just as detailed, absolutely insane.
His pencils are crazy too. Like, I've got a whole book where he did all biblical drawings.
Yeah,
and they're still in this style. So you'd see Jesus with all these muscles and everything.
Yeah. But all the cloaks, like the drapery and flowing, like,
they're amazing. Yeah, they're so expressive. And I just like his work is very much what I try to think about with my work, just in terms of like, you want something to be dark and look very have a sense of maybe like horror and fantasy and everything to it, but a little bit of like cheekiness, a little bit of cartooniness, which I sometimes try to get away from, but I sometimes can't really help but like have a style where some things turn out a little cartoony. So like I always look at his stuff and try to think like it's okay to be a little cartoony, because his stuff is not realistic whatsoever, and it looks awesome.
Definitely.
Oh yeah, we got to get a bolt thrower in here.
Yeah, great album.
OG.
Yeah, and this is the original version of this album art, where they had to change later because obvious copyright reasons with the
Games Workshop.
Games Workshop, the Warhammer folks. This was a case of me like early on seeing this album cover and being like, that's the coolest logo I've ever seen. or like, what is this game soundtrack? Because it looks like old school game artwork. And obviously they started to lean into that. This is where I think this is like the cover where they unveiled this logo. Because I think prior to that, I don't think they had it. And then this is where like that synonymous relation with what you're seeing on the cover versus like what the actual music is about and everything, like really start to mesh together perfectly. And I can't like get Bolt Thrower's music out of my head without thinking of like this type of like war epic, like showdown sort of stuff going on.
Definitely.
Yeah. And just loving, I just already like love Civic's work in general. Like I've never played Warhammer ever, but like I will look at this artwork and just like admire it and just be like, wow, this is so, again, a case of something being very cartoony, but very like awesome and big feeling all around. And
you really get the feeling of chaos, don't you? It's just such a chaotic piece. And it just fits in with the music so well. Like, I love Bolt Thrower. You really do get that feeling of like war metal. It's so well done.
Yeah, the blasts from the guns and everything, like feeling like they got a real big power behind them, and then like all the explosions happening behind them that are all very like rough and powder looking. Like it's it's very much something where like this is the kind of logo where like it could have gone horribly wrong. But it's so perfectly of its time and in that aesthetic that it works. And I love something that bold actually working. There's a couple other Bolt Thrower albums that I totally put the art for, but this is one where like I saw the record, I saw the logo, and immediately wanted to listen to it. And then later learning like, oh yeah, they actually are into Warhammer. Like there's a charm knowing like, oh, they are a bunch of dorks.
Well, this is their first official album, isn't it? This is like 1990, I believe.
Yeah, it was the one before it. I forget the name. In Battle, There Is No Law. Yeah, where it's just the black and white, kind of sketchy looking with the bolt thrower on the side. But this is where it feels like they became Bolt Thrower.
Nice.
Is my mic working?
You're good.
Yeah, you're good.
I'm good. I got kicked out of the chat, and I thought I'd relocate downstairs just because I'm probably shouting over sleeping children. So
no problem.
Sorry for the slight relocation.
No worries.
Yeah. Well, obviously, when Shindy was talking about this one, I love Bolt Thrower, by the way. Sorry, I would have happily yapped on about that one, but I missed the window. Yeah, I love Death. They're one of my favorite bands, and like Shindy, Symbolic is my favorite album by theirs as well. But I love them all. But this was the cover, along with Spiritual Healing, but especially this one, where I was like, that is just perfect. Like, again, it's the pinks and whites that you would never imagine using, but it's just so thrash. I know they're a death metal band, but it's such a thrash style cover with I don't know if necessarily that's what you look like if you get Leprosy, but it's almost got that Melted by Toxic waste style thing that anybody who's seen RoboCop or what have you has got a slight morbid curiosity with from people of ourish generation. But yeah, I was wearing that my top today.
That's the best Death logo too.
It's so good.
Oh yeah, definitely, yeah.
And it's so obvious that this played a big part in influencing you and your work.
I think
definitely the purples, pinks.
Yeah,
the multiple light sources as well. Like you can see the light shine coming off his face on the side. You've got the top down lighting.
When I see your Inhuman Condition work, I think like, oh yeah, this is a guy who grew up with these kind of covers, but is like doing it through his own lens, where it's not just like the figure on one side, the landscape on the other side. That's a Repka thing, but you're kind of like taking that influence and doing your own stuff. It's great.
It's a bit of a blend. And Terry from Inhuman Condition played on this record, or was in the band at that era of Death.
Oh, I didn't know that.
There is a connection to that.
And he did Peace Cells Megadeth, right?
Repka? Absolutely. I mean, I think I've got another Repka one coming up, so I can chat a little bit more about him. But he is openly my favorite most influential artist, I suppose, in terms of what I've learned from him, because it was the Death and the Megadeth covers that just made me want to do exactly the sort of covers like that. The classic off to the side guy, but with more stuff going on behind. And it is that multiple light sources of maybe the cool purple rim light coming off screen from somewhere. And it doesn't necessarily have to be purple, but just that completely contrasting light source that I find makes pictures just look really interesting to me and my own personal tastes. And I got to redo the Leprosy guy for the Left to Die guys, which features half the Death lineup and then half the other ones, which was super cool, because again, it's like you can never work for Death because Chuck's dead. So like it's the closest you can ever really get to working with Death is working with half the guys that were in Death and then half the guys who are in Gruesome, which are basically a Death, not a Death tribute band, but a Death homage band of originals, I suppose. And, you know, it was obviously a dream commission from the point of view that it's just recreating a cover that has been a massive part of your life. So back when I used to play in bands in the mid-2000s, I was always wearing this Leprosy top, even though it's probably like maybe my fifth favorite Death album or fourth or fifth favorite Death album. It doesn't matter because it was so strong aesthetically.
And that's got to feel like such a full circle moment to be able to work on something like that for them.
Definitely.
Where you're high-fiving your 13-year-old self. Like, dude, I got to do some cool shit. Just wait.
Definitely. It's one, I mean, and obviously I know you've more than been there yourself recently, but it is one of those ones where I sort of go, how on earth has this happened? But then I realized that, well, if you do stuff that was influenced by the things that you love and then doing that later, that's how they find you in the end. So it's not some sort of weird, magical, undeserved thing that happened. It's more that you've basically been creating the content that they used to like, and you were influenced by it, and now they see that and go, "Oh, cool, let's."
But you have to do it good enough to where they notice.
I think, and it's got to be authentic and not like a bad like parody or rip-off or anything like that. And I've plenty of time. I take it as a huge compliment, but loads of times people have mistaken my work for Repka's. If I don't get credited in a cover, like on numerous ones, people have said, "Who did this? Is it Repka? Is it Repka? Is it Repka?" And far from bothering me, it's probably the biggest compliment you can get, because I know the difference, because I love his 80s and 90s and early 2000s work. But you realize that even if you try not to do stuff that looks like that, it's like the cartoony element of it, not that I see much cartoony stuff, you know where your DNA is and you can't escape from that sometimes. So whatever you do comes out looking like the sum of your influences, and I'll never be able to not have Leprosy and Peace Cells and Rust in Peace as part of my upbringing, because that's all I used to do, like, you know, all I wanted to do when I was a kid. So yeah, massive one for me, that, really. Even though it's like musically, like I say, like it's way down my list of Death albums and favorite albums, even though I still love it, but it's just as a cover, it's
visually stunning. Yeah
More Pink Sky as well. Look at all that dead space up the top. Doesn't matter in the slightest. Just
doesn't matter.
Brilliant. Yeah, cool. Oh yeah, so I tried to keep in a theme. This is the Repka tier, and it could have been this and it could have been Peace Cells, but one of the things that I think is prevalent through my covers as well is having a really dominant single color and throughout it. Like, and they might have more colors, but there's like, this is a blue album, this is a green album, this is a purple album or a teal album, whatever it is. And what Leprosy is pink, Rust in Peace is blue, Peace Cells is red, Spiritual Healing is blue, and all the other classic Ed Repka covers of that era, they would have a apocalyptic sky color, whether it was green or purple, red, pink, blue, and that gave the theme of the whole of the album, and then it dictated the colors that were in the shadows of the other lighting, and that for me was something that is just super inspirational. And here there's the sort of like, it's the little, you don't think of Rust in Peace as being purple or pink, But look at that sort of bottom pink lighting that is off his right sleeve and off the bottom of that alien case, and then the rim lights that hit, or the off lights that hit the all the politicians in the background, just gives it this not magical sense, because it's not fantasy art, but just a really intriguing sense of light source. And I think light more than anything, even if you don't have the best grasp of it, a fun light source completely transforms a piece. And I see loads of nearly good bits of artwork or album covers that are death metal or thrash, and you're like, what is it that's missing about them? And often it's just a kind of a bit of a bland light source, or missing a light source from somewhere else. And Replica, more than anyone, I think, had these fun off-camera light sources, making everything look pretty interesting.
Well, and it helps break up the color. Like, this is a blue cover, but without that pink and purple underneath the alien device, like, it would maybe get a little flat.
It would be totally monochromatic. It would be super flat. And even that green, having a green like that and it not looking super garish is just, it's crazy. It's quite a feat.
Yeah, and all the single artwork from this era was equally amazing. Like the Hangar 18 art and Take No Prisoners were equally good. And yeah, like, I mean, and obviously, I mean, this would get my vote as the best album of all time, like, just objectively. I think it's an absolute masterpiece. And naturally, the combination of the good music and the good art, as I've said far too many times, combines for an absolute classic. Yeah.
Yeah, I just like it you can't beat it, you know? Like, this is a case where, like, you know, it is beyond iconic. When I think of Megadeth, I think of this cover.
Yeah, this and Peace Cells for sure. I was just like, wow, this is like, it totally embodies the sound fully. Where it was like the music and the artwork was just so intertwined in such a perfect way. But again, it might just be a psychological thing where you look at the artwork, and it's because it's so impactful, it then infers what you experience the music to sound like in a way.
Yeah.
Music is stellar on this album.
Oh yeah,
I think not that they're competition, but I actually probably like the music more than the cover in this case. Like, I like this cover, but the Peace Cells one I like quite a bit more personally.
Oh, I love
not
that
there's
one.
anything wrong with this. It's just for some reason it doesn't stick with me as much.
I mean, it's this was the peak of music as far as I was concerned. But I mean, I wouldn't have argued for either. I mean, a Peace Cells one probably influenced me more than this one as a piece of art. But like, it's just you can flip them. And I think the single artwork for this helped, because I've got all the 7-inch singles for this era, and that helps make it, because you get more than just this one cover.
I think what helps, like, I think with this, I think it helps define Megadeth a little bit more, because it's so specifically political, in that, like, this kind of helped define what a lot of the thrash genre would later be, and people who would call themselves thrash bands, a lot of them would be explicitly political and have stuff like this on their covers. And, like, subject matter wise and in the lyrics and everything, like, this cover's perfectly emblematic of everything that's inside.
Such a good point as well. That's why I think I always preferred Megadeth in a way around the same time as Metallica, where Metallica was still great, but I've always been drawn to politically driven music and art, because it's just so much more cathartic to me. As much as I love tongue-in-cheek, you know, fantasy or, you know, very metal sort of themes, I did love the political era of Megadeth for sure.
I mean, it sums up 1990 in that sort of around the sort of the communism and the fall of the Berlin Wall, and the way that the nuclear, like, the Cold War and everything that was happening at that point in time, it kind of really goes hand in hand with that sort of bleakness, that the world being potentially on the edge of extinction, but no one was quite sure where it was going to come from. Yeah,
and it was nice having people actually mention it, because sometimes I find the reality is actually way more bleaker than the fantasy stuff that you enjoy. You know, when you look into like politics and the stuff that's going on, I don't want to go off on too much of a tangent, but when it comes to like the UK at the moment and the economy and, you know, COVID and everything, there's a lot of bleak stuff happening that is just way more frightening than a horror film. It's because it's just so much more fantastical, and it's abstract and opaque because you can't imagine it happening. But you know, the stuff that is actually happening in terms of politics and the world can be so much more grim and so much more visceral.
Well, that helped differentiate Megadeth from Metallica in a huge way. Like, hey, I kind of want to talk about stuff. Like, of course, like James would have, like, you know, obviously Master of Puppets is about a whole lot of stuff. But like this Megadeth is explicitly political in its lyrics, and that helped be like, no, we are different. We're not trying to be that.
And what this does is what like Power Slave does, in that there is a handful of political songs on Rust in Peace, but it's not exclusively that. It's maybe only half the album, and then plenty of other ones are about relationships or fantasy stuff, except that it starts off with Holy Wars, ends with Rust in Peace Polaris, and you piece the bits in between to assume it's all about like nuclear Armageddon, whereas that's the strength of the whole package again, evoking a vibe of a record, and even when other songs might have strayed from the path. But again, 1990 had a bunch of other records around this time that was cool, that was about that. And I don't think as a kid at that point I realized what was going on in the rest of the world. But I think we'd
just see a cool album cover.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh
right, Shindy, you're up.
Another Whelan.
Yeah, another Whelan. Like, it's got to be. So the reason I chose this one is because I hadn't actually seen the Arise artwork until years after. I bought Roots on CD and loved that cover as well. But then when I digged deeper into Sepultura, I just saw this and I was like, wow! I was just the detail and the mechanic. You know, like the machinery, the tubes, like the mix of abstract expressionism there, like with the background, like
the bricks are so weird. Yeah,
the bricks, this weird vortex that's happening, like the diseased bricks, like it's just so multifaceted, and the lighting as well. Like if you look at the hands and everything, just so well done.
A lot of yellow and blue covers. You know, it blew me away, and this was such a huge inspiration in terms of detail and having actually like defined lines for everything. This was such a huge piece for me, where I was, you know, at that time I was still just kind of hand copying frames from like comics and stuff, and you know, like Slipknot covers. But then when I saw this, I was like, wow, this is like just an imagination on a totally different plane to what I've seen before, and just the level of realism, but expressionism as well. The rusty mechanical bits are so real looking. Like the textures on it are insane.
It's and like brutalism as well. Like it's got this weird brutalism, techie, just so sick. I could talk about this cover for hours, honestly.
Yeah, it's amazing.
I just love they have that like organic feeling background to contrast with the mechanical, and then it's like there's a lot of the bricks are very softly rendered, you know, so it has that depth. But like that's really what makes it. If that was like a flat, like just color, it wouldn't nearly be as cool.
Yeah,
I absolutely love this piece. It's one of my absolute favorites, and I like Chaos AD as an album, but I wish Chaos AD sounded like Arise or Beneath the Remains, because that would make, because I then wouldn't know which to choose, because this piece of art is phenomenal, and it actually somehow manages to work despite the fact that it's very clearly a portrait bit that's been having to shoehorned without a crop into a square cover. But like, I don't have anything more to add on to what you said, other than the fact that you can stare at the brickwork and what the hell's going on there for hours. Never mind the actual stuff in the detail. Like, there's that sort of weird portal stuff going on in the background. It's so good.
Yeah, you might have missed it, Dan, but I didn't actually hear Arise until years later. So for me, it was Roots first, then it was Chaos AD, kind of going through the discography and stuff and just seeing the CD. You would never see Arise anywhere in any of the record shops or anything. So it was Chaos AD and Roots for me. But yeah, when I heard Arise and then I saw that cover, that was just absolutely insane. But I think because of the impact this had at that point, because I had no other reference, it was, and it's still quite a strong album for me. Like, I love Territory, such a sick track. Refuse Resist, like that first track, you got the quintessential Andreas Kisser, like wah kind of leads just going straight in there. Like, really great production as well, super tight production.
There's almost an argument to be made that it could be the first new metal record ever. I know it's not exclusively that, but this came out before the likes of Korn did, and the simplified one-note riffs that you get every now and again. I know Roots was a lot more down that way, but you saw the start of that happen on this album before everyone else was really doing that, which is...
That's a very good point.
Like,
it's less thrashy. It's almost got some hardcore bits to it.
That's right. Yeah. And I
some groove in there as well, some kind of stoner grooves and stuff, which is really sick.
Yeah, I certainly wouldn't say that this is a new metal record, but you definitely see that happening. And what it turned into Soulfly and Roots, and that sort of tribal simplicity that happened in new metal, where you're not playing thrash stuff whatsoever. It really was a huge album, I think, influential wise on the wider market. But yeah, sick album.
Another thing that was really cathartic for me was obviously growing up in a very English neighborhood, being, you know, an Indian kid and listening to music that was very Western in a way. It was very much of the Western world, but then hearing music that had an indigenous vibe to it, like it had these tribal drums in there. It was very cathartic for me as someone that felt that I didn't really fit into, like, say, the Western world or even like the Indian world that I come from, you know, like I was the only Indian kid that listened to metal. I was the only Indian kid with like piercings and stuff, and as I got older, tattoos. So they've always been a very cathartic band for me, where it's like, this is a powerful indigenous sound that everyone appreciates because of the brutality of it and the heaviness of it. That was another huge part of, you know, inspiration for me as an artist and a musician as well.
That's cool.
Probably the one band that maybe ties us all together, I believe, as well. I think we've all worked for them in some capacity.
Have we all done Cavalera stuff?
Well, we've done Sepultura. We've done shirts for Sepultura, and you've done Soulfly. So
there we go.
Cool. Yeah. Nice. I just need Lee to do a piece for him, man. Sell him the Contortionist piece.
That's it.
Eventually. That's really neat. I didn't even think about that. All right, then we got Earth AD.
Oh yeah,
yeah, man. So so you found the bloody artist name? Jesus, I scoured.
This is a hunt too, man. And if I'm wrong, sorry, but yeah, this one was a bit of a hunt. Surprisingly,
it really is. I couldn't find any details, and I wasn't sure if it was the same artist that did Scum for Napalm Death. I'm not sure.
It does look a lot like it.
Similar style.
But like for me, it was music first, and then I saw the album cover, because I think music-wise, I had a punk friend of mine in school, and he showed me the music, and I just fell in love with it. It was just like pure, really heavy, ferocious hardcore. Like, this is me and Dan, when we met up in person not long ago, I was telling him about how, you know, when people think of Misfits, they think of like the really uber theatrical horror punk, like almost tongue-in-cheek era. But like a lot of people, not a lot of people, but, you know, when you come out of the commercial side of them, there's this really heavy, brutal, like almost like very grindy sound to them, which I just absolutely love. And still to this day, every couple of months I listen to this record.
I like how you got Chaos AD and Earth AD in there for your...
This is a case where, like, I can imagine them just, like, knowing Mark and be like, hey, could you draw us something cool?
Yeah.
And he drew this on, like, a piece of paper, and they colored it. And, like, this is the kind of stuff I'd love to, like, draw in my notebook as a kid. Just, man. You know, masses of faces and folds and bones and stuff. It's just... It's just fun detail work.
And it's dot shading as well, man, which is a pain in the ass. Like, you know, I love doing it with my personal work, but when it comes to bands that commission me, I'm like, dude, you cannot afford like the amount of time it takes for me to shade everything with dot shading. It's
so
just,
much.
Yeah, it's just a lot, but it's really gritty, really visceral. And again, musically, man, it's just so fast and so ferocious. It's just, I've still yet to this day heard a hardcore record that is this fast and this heavy, and like
it's so catchy on top of it.
Super catchy as well, man. Yeah. And the album before this, you got Static Age, which is very 50s noir kind of like pop. It's so strange.
That's kind of the Misfits I like more, frankly.
Yeah,
yeah, where it's just sped up 50s doo-wop.
Yeah,
stuff,
yeah.
You know?
Which is cool. I love that just as much. But yeah, coming up as like a metal punk head, like hearing this and like Entombed around the same sort of time, it was just so sick. And looking at this artwork even now, it's just so gritty and disgusting. It's super sick. But yeah, I highly recommend. Dan, you still need to check their older stuff because you would love it.
Yeah, I need to get on it, and it's the fault of bands releasing too much good music at the moment, meaning there's not been enough hours in the day. It's so difficult to like get through the list of things. But yeah, I'll get on it. I need to get on it soon.
The sad thing is as well, like the Misfits are essentially like a toy company now, which is just really embarrassing. Like Jerry Ole's just he's just turned it into a really cringy Disney sort of. Yeah, it's not what it was at all. They've really tarnished the name, and there's a lot of legalities involved in suing each other for the name and stuff like that. And to be fair, the album, is it Famous Monsters? Yeah. I quite liked.
It's got a lot of catchy tunes on it.
It's catchy, and it's
fun
in its own way.
Yeah, it's not Danzig, but it's still solid tunes.
Yeah, I love the kind of the campness of it, but this is my favorite era for sure.
Was Famous Monsters a Repka cover?
It might be because it looks kind of like that.
It might be. You know,
I know one
very
of them
portrait heavy.
One of them was a Jason Edmondson one.
Oh,
that's American Psycho.
That's the coffin one, I think. I forget the name of it, where it's got like Doyle on it, but
yeah, there's American Psycho, then Famous Monsters. I think it might be Repka. I need to look it up. But
I got the piece up, so it's definitely portrait.
Oh, was it Go-Go's? Did Basil Go-Go's did it? Because he did a lot of the Famous Monsters like magazine stuff.
Oh god, maybe it's gonna take too much long. It's actually harder. Here's a public statement. Make it easy for album artists to get credited because trying to find shit was way too hard, and it's like. We've got to fix that. That's
why every time a new thing drops, I update it on Encyclopedia Metallum. Yeah, because I know like nobody else is going to do it for me. So
that's a good
let me do it.
Yeah,
and bands don't realize how vital it is just to tag and credit the artist when you've done some work for them. Like it's such a small thing to do, but it's just huge. Yeah,
it means the world, and like for a lot of people, visual art's close to as important as the music. And for us, it's equally, but even for just fans,
it's literally career changing, isn't it? Anyway, Lee's.
Oh,
Larry Carroll. So Slayer's run with his art is awesome and definitely so distinguished from everything else that was going on. Personally, I like South of Heaven the most. I think it's just got like kind of that Bosch kind of feel to it.
Yeah, that's what they're going for, definitely.
Yeah. Of course, Rain and Blood is absolutely sick too, but I love this album as well. I love that it's like a little slower down, more groovy.
I love the sound of this album. Yeah,
it's the one I reach for the most, and like you can tell, like a bunch of hardcore bands, took the sound of this album and like made it their own. But I don't think Larry Carroll's really mentioned that much because he's so tied to Slayer. But just like all the cool textures. The fact that it's loose and adventurous, the paint does a lot of the talking.
It looks cool so evil.
Yes.
Like it looks it's so distinctly evil when compared to the aesthetic of their thrash metal like the rest of the people in the genre around this time.
Sorry, I see what you mean. Yeah.
It's the crassness of it, isn't it? It's just so crude, even in terms of application and execution.
But at the same time, it's got that Hieronymus Bosch depiction of hell feel to it, if not necessarily the same sort of way it's being drawn. Like, as in, it just feels like you're in some sort of surreal hell landscape. And I never really, I mean, I love Slayer, and again, they were one of my first bands that I bought all their stuff on cassette, but their album covers in a different way didn't draw you in like, say, an Iron Maiden one was, because you almost couldn't make sense of it. That's not to say that it's better or worse, it's more that it
has a Goya quality to it, almost.
Yeah.
I think that's what makes it scarier. There's more mystery.
It's just a really horrifying piece, even if you can't explain what's going on. But like you say, I never really took stock of this until you said it now, that it isn't really like at all what anyone else was doing. Like, it just far cry from all of the other thrash and death metal bands, because I don't know if Larry Carroll did stuff for other bands, but I can't picture that sort of work being on other covers.
I don't know anything besides the Slayer stuff, personally. Yeah. And it was actually kind of hard to find his name, like harder than it should be. Let's put it that way.
Yeah,
I found it easier than the Holy Moses one was the toughest one for sure.
Yeah, that's one where it's like, good luck. Like, if I ever find a vinyl of that, like I'm stealing it.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
All right, and then I think this is my first Seagrave, right?
Hey, there we go.
Dude.
I didn't realize he did the Carnage cover. Oh,
yeah, that's crazy. I didn't realize that was Seagrave.
It's like, man, it reminds me of like the inside of an ear or some shit, but like the most grotesque Catulian ear. But God,
but it's also a face. You know, it's crazy.
Great lights and darks. I love how, the bottom right corner doesn't have a lot of attention drawn to it, so it's perfect for the logo. I mean, I just think it's like there's like a doodle kind of quality to it, where it's like, you kind of imagine it in a state of stream of consciousness, or at least I would see it. So
you're just rendering veins and folds forever.
Yeah. It's definitely one of those covers where you're just kind of blagging it until it looks cool, like, rather than strictly. It doesn't feel like it's planned out, not in a bad way. I mean that in a loving way. It just feels like it's very surreal, and I guess a bit like Altars of Madness, where you're probably just making up shapes and then filling in the gaps, as opposed to having a very strict plan of where every little bit goes.
You could tell around this era he did a lot of that, because I wonder if maybe some of it was like, I may not have like the technical skill to do a lot of like realistic stuff, but he has like rendering skill like crazy. For being this young, and he really leans into that,
and a great imagination.
That's crazy.
Great imagination. Yeah,
it's amazing when you see guys like that that have changed, and even more extreme examples. And we won't be mentioning him here, maybe because he's a bit more recent. But Wes Ben-Scota, who does his early stuff, is like Divine Intervention by Slayer, which is all that airbrush stuff, and you think how different that looks compared to like the Phantom Antichrist or the more recent Autopsy and Bloodbath records. He's now got his own style that's a bit raw, and I personally love it. His earlier style.
To pick this. This Sinister album covered by Wes. I love this one.
Totally different.
That's a case where nowadays when you say his name, like, you think of the style, but that's the now style. Early on is way different. Crazy.
Definitely,
all right, James.
Oh yeah. So like this is a case where like this approach and these colors and everything's super influential to how I like to approach.
Vallejo was a nut job, absolutely crazy.
Yeah, and the fact that his wife Julie Bell is like equally as talented, and they're just like this crazy, like super talented duo. This is a case of like it's maybe sillier than some of Ozzy's other stuff, specifically because of his face on that demon thing. But I think specifically that woman with her pose and her sleeves and her hair doing that is just one of the like coolest things I've seen on an album cover. Like I love me a flowy, smoky thing blooming out. Like that's in that's in almost all of my pieces, and every time I do it, I'm like, shit, I did it again. But it's just because it just feels so nice. It's just a good way to add movement to blank spaces.
Same with me, like drapery and cloth and stuff. Like it just gives you some room to be expressive, but also adds some real flow to an image. You know.
Yeah, nothing like, you know, like clothes, hair, fire, water, any stuff, malleable stuff like that to give you a little bit of movement in your piece. And this is a case like I like the album, but I think it's a case of where like it's my favorite Ozzy cover, and I think just the art in general, like color tone wise, is like I know we've all got like go-tos. So Dan, like your pinks and purples and blues are very much like I can think of that as when I think of your stuff. Like when I think of what I try to strive for, it's around this color scheme right here, where it's like these really red and almost orangey, like pink reds. And then these blacks that aren't quite black, they've almost got like a grayish green to them. It just that adds so much to making things look old and retro. Whereas like I think that like if you saw the original painting of this, like when he painted it, I'd imagine the blacks aren't as faded as they look in this picture because it's like a scan of a record cover. But there's something that we associate with seeing like the textures and the not true blacks on stuff like this that we think like, oh, that's an old record cover, or there's a nostalgic factor to it. And
it's the imperfections that you, or not the imperfections, but it's the way that you've seen it rather than the way that it was intended that makes it special.
So like even just seeing like creases on the edge of it and scratches and everything like that just adds so much character that's not really intended by Boris when he made the painting, but there's something about it that just makes me comfy because I just think of pulpy horror fantasy novels, and that's like very much where I draw a good chunk of my inspiration. So this is right smack dab that.
I love the balance of the way that most of the information is weighted on the left side. Really clever. And I always find it's amazing when albums can do that, when they take the bulk of the detail and then the other side is sparse, you know, like we've mentioned up top, and this one has it on the other way around, on a horizontal, sort of on a more vertical way, where the left hand side is where all your detail is, and then the right hand side there's not that much going on, but it just leads to a really interesting composition.
His understanding of anatomy is insane as well. Like my dad actually had an old art book of his, and they're very kind of psychosexual pieces. So there's one of a man and a woman embracing, and the man has a dragon tattoo, and it goes from like a very like a tattoo looking piece into an actual dragon, and it is so well done, like beautiful, and the uber sort of fantasy sexual pieces again, like just his understanding of anatomy in the female form, super influential for me. Just looking at that stuff, like knees and elbows and just these different angles that he could portray, was just so well done.
And I love how like they've continued to have that aesthetic into stuff like the Aqua Teen Hunger Force movie poster, and they worked on that, and it's very much
Andrew WK
style. Andrew WK, yes, and so they've kind of like, this is their style, and I love it so much.
Well, Julie Bell was like a bodybuilder that also posed for him all the time as well, wasn't it? So he kind of had
he was a bodybuilder too.
Yeah, I didn't know that about him as well, but he obviously had good references on tap, because
that's why I want to get ripped just so I can take pictures for reference, because I hate having to look for reference, but it's so hard to get ripped.
I think he befriended a bunch of bodybuilders. I think Dan's definitely the most ripped here.
Oh yeah. You've got more shoulders than the three of us combined.
Probably more in the tummy section as well at the moment. Yeah, but, so I'll pull off the Renaissance woman as well as the I'll split the arms.
More reference material.
Yeah. We've got the hair and the eyelashes. You've got the guns.
There you go.
There we go. We'll form a perfect reference image of it as an amalgam.
All right, and I put this as your number 2, James. I don't know if it is your legitimate number 2.
Yes, it's my number 2. This is another case of a artist's early work that's very rough, and they later on would become much more cleaned up. Like Necrolord's stuff is so influential to the kind of work that I do, in that it's very detailed. But kind of cartoony in some places. I just remember seeing this cover and being like, I have to listen to this. I love all the details and everything. It's actually close to the style that I had maybe around when I discovered this, was maybe around 13, 14. And it was also my first real intro into black metal. So it's one of those that it'll always have a special place in my heart, because when you're young and discovering different genres and everything, you try to dabble into what's considered the top 10 or whatever of anything. And this was
one of the best logos ever. Just
easy,
amazing.
And later on, I'd say the even more influential cover by Necrolord was for Black Dahlia Murder's Nocturnal for me, and that was a record that I just played nonstop in high school. But his approach to spooky castles and mountains and clouds and everything, it's so weird. Like that, this guy's done so much. He's great with mountains and cathedrals, because he's done so much of that for Black Dahlia Murder and Necrophobic.
Sacramentum.
Yeah, and it's weird. He's even done covers I didn't know what was him. I didn't know he did the Slaughter of the Soul cover for the longest time.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, so this guy's a case of he does a lot, mostly monochromatic stuff. But with that, I feel like I could totally see him just getting into a groove of doing all the different details, the trees, the mountains, and everything. And he almost doesn't have to worry about the color, because it's all values at that point. And I like that idea of it. It almost feels meditative anytime I do something like that, because a lot of my work, I start out in grayscale, and then I eventually gradually add colors onto it. But yeah, this is a case of this also was very influential to every black metal band later on who wanted a blue spooky castle on a cover. You see that into stuff like Stormkeep nowadays. It's just its effects are everywhere, to where it's almost a cliche at this point.
To me, this was always almost like the sister album cover to Left Hand Path, in terms of those early blue and black creepy landscape things. But I'm also just suddenly thinking now how funny this album would have been if it had the papyrus font saying in the Nightside Eclipse, and how that would have just undermined the black metalness of it.
But I was Comic Sans.
Comic Sans.
Yes. Very black metal Comic Sans.
Have you seen Necrolord's cover for Dismember's Massive Killing Capacity?
Oh, yeah, with the big chainsaw thing.
Yeah, because that's kind of sort of notable by being more not in a bad way, but knockoff Bolt Thrower.
It looks like that. Yeah.
Totally different, isn't it? Compared to the landscape stuff. But I had no idea about Slaughter of the Soul, because that's
that looks sick.
Oh, it's great cover.
Yeah.
What's really cool about this cover as well is there's not really any depth in it, in the sense that the levels of the blacks in the far mountains are
everywhere.
The same as the feather, and I couldn't do that in terms of, you've created the form and you've let the highlights create the depth, as opposed to I'd have to pull stuff back and make it less contrast, less black in the distance. But with this, you've managed to create a landscape with just by carving bits out using the light rather than the right.
It kind of looks like a lino cut, like a folk art kind of lino cut.
Yeah, like almost like it was on a black surface, and then
That's
they
right,
just
yeah.
added the colors.
It adds to the impact for me because it's so dense that there isn't this room for, like far distance and very front foreground. It just adds to the bleakness of the sound and the name of the title and everything. It just technically speaking, I'd say it would lack if I were to like rip it apart, which I'm not. I'm just saying like it maybe lacks that distance and that scale that maybe Seagrave has, where it has fog in the distance or mist. But I think it really lends itself to this sound and just this cover because it's so dense and you just feel totally lost in nighttime when you see this.
I hate painting night. Like I don't like painting black sky.
It's really tough.
Because it doesn't allow for interesting light, really, either. In terms of if you think
weird
about
to balance. It's so easy to make things too dark.
Definitely, yeah. That's why I like the mid-range colors because the sort of the greens, reds, and purples all allow a fairly wide mid-range that allows you to go either dark or light either side of it. But if you've got something that's black, you can't have anything that's in shadow in black because there's nowhere to go with it really. Because
none more black.
You've maxed out.
Well played. Well played.
Yeah.
All right, we ready for number ones?
Number ones, let's do it.
All right, Dan, you ready?
Yeah.
You pick this.
Yeah.
Mad Tattoo of the Western World.
Are you fucking kidding me? Is this? Are we joking right now?
So why did you pick?
You got
man?
fucking like potato faces and like jizz logo. Like what are we doing?
I like Easter rock and potato chips is my favorite things in the world. And you know what I thought?
I also like potato chips. This is the greatest cover ever.
I do love chips. I do love crisps. I'm a very savory kind of guy, but this is crazy. What the fuck?
All right.
There we go.
All right.
Cool, okay.
Yes, the correct choice.
Oh man, so this is for me. I think it's the best on multiple levels. Firstly, I love the music. I like Sepultura an awful lot, but this was the album that is far and away my favorite musically. But like, as soon as I bought it, I ran home and tried to draw it. And before that, when I bought the album, I was just looking at it on the car on the way home, sort of studying every little bit of it. Like, oh, look at that mouth, that eye, the lobster claws, the bum, the random bum that appears there. Like that. You wouldn't have thought you'd necessarily reach for. Just that kind of weird sort of seaweedy type plants at the bottom. It's just so... like I didn't know what Lovecraft was at the time, obviously. And this clearly is very influenced by those type of gods. But again, it reminded me of the darker PC games and PC cover games of that time, or at least... even if there's nothing that looked like that, it reminded me of that. But it's all in yellow and brown, which are colours that I hate and never really use myself. But just the execution of it is just so unbelievable. And it's like, I can't think of anything else that looks like it. Even with the orange fonts and placements of the, the Casablanca Antique or whatever the font type the Sepultura use. It's so simple. It's just a typeface, but it just all works together. And this cover to me sounds like the opening bars of Arise, where you get that grindy alien factory world thing before it all kicks in. And again, it's one of those ones where, like Power Slave before it, the whole, and Rust in Peace, the whole album to me feels like this cover. And the stuff like Dead Embryonic Cells might be nothing to do with this piece of art, but it feels like it does just by virtue of the vibe that it's got. And it's obviously Michael Whelan again, who has popped up a lot. And I think this was I'm sure I read about how he made this, and it was almost a bash of bits that he'd drawn separately that he then put together and then painted over at some point.
Like it looks like The Thing, like
very much so, doesn't it?
But perfectly, it totally oddly fits. Like I wouldn't like the name of the album and this art. I wouldn't immediately think like would go together, but of course, since this is like one of like their best albums, like I can't pull them apart. But it's so perfect, and like this and Beneath the Remains are both like very influential to me, because I love me a gooey mass of skulls and gross things, and then with a smoky, fiery thing coming out at some place.
Such an emphasis on design as well, like the ectoplasm at the top, and then the weird stringy slime between the two claws, and then the brain, and the way it all flows and just comes down at the bottom, and then you have the foreground kind of pulling you in. It's just, I saw this again years after, and I was like, Jesus. And it was an absolute, like a bit of a brag, but it was an absolute honor to reimagine this for the band. Like, absolutely, like, pinch me moment. Like, even though like Max Cavalier had all the legalities and stuff, he wasn't involved in the band. It was still just insane. And then to see Dan do the Roots cover, and it's like what else did you do you've done 2 pieces for them, right?
I've done one for Quadra that I'm not sure if it's
same.
yet. So
I've done one for Quadra as well, and I've not heard anything about it yet.
No, they're not. It's a different sort of client where it just appears online when it's being sold in a shop, as opposed to being when you're dealing with management, as opposed to dealing with band members directly. You form a different sort of relationship. But so something to come out. But I was going to say, I knew you'd done the sort of the reimagining of the Arise cover, which was awesome. And I think you did such a good job of doing something that was similar but not the same, because I'd so struggle to move away from what has been laid out before me and alter this, really.
Thanks, man. That was a challenge, because again, like with legalities, I couldn't be too on the nose. I had to be different enough where you could say it wasn't a total parody or a copy. But that was really interesting.
But I love the asymmetry of this piece, because it's nearly symmetrical but not quite, and that just lends to this creepy otherworldliness of the whole thing. But I think it's my favorite cover, and it's very, you could see where Evil went with Infected Nations. That cover is very similar to this, which was also a Michael Whelan one. And I mean, it might even be, I don't even say it's better, because it's very difficult. I can't view this through an objective lens, because I associate my music and childhood with this album more than the Evil one. But the Evil Infected Nations cover is absolutely killer as well. And obviously they're a good band, but they're not the sort of influential on the Sepultura level of band. And that obviously does help determine how classic an album cover is. But it's super weird, and I wondered if it was Lovecraft inspired. I'm not necessarily sure, but more than anything, I'd have loved to have heard the backstory behind
it was a
all
book
of
cover
this.
as well.
What? Sorry,
like, it was a book cover as well, like Cause of Death.
That makes because the Beneath the Remains one definitely has more of book cover vibe more so than this one does. But and that was a wicked cover as well. The Beneath the Remains art is fantastic as well, but it's just a bit simpler and a bit less to it to be super excited about, versus this and Chaos AD, which have got more going on, I guess, that artistically you can sort of spaff all over. Because Beneath the Remains almost does an awful lot with quite a little, if you know what I mean. A lot of it's implied. Yeah. So that's my number one.
The interesting thing here is the way he uses actual like Aztec tablets as well, and Brazilian cacti or cactus, I don't know what the plural is, and the way he's actually tied that into the design as well, so it does make it like an indigenous image, with like indigenous like undertones. It's just absolutely crazy, like really sick.
the rendering on all the wrinkles and the sort of little pimples on the skin is also so good. Like when you just see how well it's been done.
It's so abstract but so clear. Like,
Dali-esque, like realism in surrealism. Yeah,
that's it. And there's not like the lighting on it feels amazing, even though it's not actually doing anything spectacular. It's just the form of everything is so good that it makes the lighting feel more impressive than it actually is, because it's not got some crazy complicated light source going on it, but just the way that everything's been carved out is absolutely phenomenal. Like technically, I think and this is the reason it's my top, is because I can at least comprehend how the rust in pieces of this world have been executed technically, but the Whelan stuff is just feels like it's next level in terms of how it's done, because it's closer to the fantasy art. Like obviously you guys have shown a bit more of that with the Boris Vallejo and what have you, but Whelan obviously bridges that gap from fantasy artist to metal album cover. Or maybe I don't know if he necessarily likes metal. I'd never pictured him as that, but it's more that he can do stuff that is perfectly suited for it without feeling like it's badly forced in any capacity.
Yeah.
All right, Shindy, you ready for your number one?
Mm-hmm.
You sure?
Yeah.
Yeah, what are we in for?
Adrian, one step into the uncertain.
I had to pick this just because of the detail in the face of the alien. You know, you just can't beat it.
Is this a Whelan? I don't know.
It's a Whelan. No, it's a Frazetta. Sorry, it's a Frazetta. This is one of his rare airbrushing pieces that he did.
I just love the cucumber eggs in the corner.
I was going to say
the cucumber. Yeah, what are those?
I thought I had seen every bad album cover ever, and I'm
that's...
delighted to say that I haven't. Gold.
Oh, this is hilarious. Oh,
you know what?
You got something more to say about this, Dan?
I was just going to say, you know what always amazes me? It reminds me of like those Ghanaian movie posters.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Where they're drawn by people who they've got a good level of art, but not a level of quality control to see that the art is nearly good but is really bad. And this is similar in that
that's kind of why it's good. Like, I don't know why.
Like I always find it weird when somebody's nearly good at art and has a degree of ability but isn't quite. And this sort of stuff is similar in that it's by people that can nearly draw but can't quite necessarily realize how things are off, if that makes sense. Anyway,
sorry. The vocalist from Def Leppard.
Yeah, Joe.
He made a cameo. Yeah.
Oh man. Okay, yeah. So this is my number one.
Interesting.
And,
I'll never have got that.
So the reason why is because mainly the music. Like the music is just so grim and just so despairing. I mean, their first two albums are just so good. Like Hands That Mold is just such a good track. It's just really slow, sludgy. Slave Chains as well is really good. It has some really like death metal vocals. I'm not sure. I think they have a feature from a death metal vocalist. I don't know the name, but yeah, just one of my all-time favorite bands. Just because they have this really palpable despair in their music, and obviously the artwork as well. So in terms of the actual album cover, and again, Lee, well done for finding the name. But apparently what they did for this and even their other album covers, where they used to get National Geographic magazines and just cut them up essentially, and just use collage. So they would just find the most grimmest stories about, you know, starvation in like Ethiopia or something like that, and then mix in some other pieces about politicians and just chop them up together and make these really elaborate pieces. So I'm guessing this was actually just one piece of photography by this photographer.
There was like 3 art credits, and I just thought that the main thing here was photography. So I got this off Discogs, so I did have to hunt a bit. So if I'm off, you know, maybe slightly, but there were a couple credits.
Yeah, it was hard for me to even try and track it down. So, but I just remember seeing the cover as well and just thinking how grim and brutalist it is. But I mean, yeah, if you guys haven't heard the band, I highly recommend listening to them.
Yeah, that's not on my radar at all.
They're one where it's like the logo has always been around. I've seen like their other album covers that are very like collage.
Yeah,
I'm familiar with Tank Crimes,
Aftermath.
The label that they're on, but like there's always that sense of like, oh yeah, I'll listen to them, and then I never get around to it.
They're like one of the first sort of they call it crust punk, but
okay,
that's kind of disingenuous because like they've just got so much more to their sound than that. They've got doom, sludge, like punk. They've got some grind influences in there, just super heavy. And it does sound dystopian. Like that logo, I don't know if any of you guys have read the Dune series by Frank Herbert, but it just
the first book at least. But I want to read the rest.
It gets to like book 4, it gets a bit crazy and a bit over the top. Like it's just hard to follow. But it just reeks of that kind of sand dunes mixed with city, just dystopia, like rusty, contorted bodies and biomech, just Tetsuo Iron Man sort of vibes. It's
very
much what this cover looks like.
Yeah, it's kind of almost a graffiti tag logo, isn't it? Like,
it is. Yeah, very urban.
Yeah, that's it.
It's so wild seeing this because it's like nothing like your art. But like that's why it's so cool to see like where we derive inspiration from, and like even if it's something completely different, it's still all like forms us in some way. So with this and the Slipknot one, it seems more of like a sense of like gnarly grunginess and texture rather than specific line work or anything.
Yeah, definitely. I definitely wanted to mix things up a bit. I didn't want it just to be about fantasy art. You know, like I could talk about Frazetta and artists like that for hours, but there's just so much more to what influences me than that, you know. Just, as long as there's a palpable sense of horror, but not in a tongue-in-cheek way, it's always going to grab my attention. And, you know, pieces like this and photography is just, it has always grabbed me in that sense. It's just so simple as well. This is just a photo of something that's so grim, but it speaks 1,000 words, like as cliche as that sounds.
Yeah, it's conceptually, it's a bit like the kind of cattle decap stuff that's the photo collage style, isn't it? In that it's telling you a lot about the bleakness rather than it being, ooh, here's a cool looking piece of art. You're more about the meaning behind it as much as anything.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
All right, for my number one, we've talked about it a lot, but I mean. You really can't go wrong with this cover. I mean, there's nothing else like it. It's extremely creative, limited color scheme. I love the red logo hits the blue, and it's like a gray kind of chromy blue. But I've always been obsessed with this. Anytime I think I have like 3 T-shirts of different eras of this exact cover, just because I just love it so much. I especially love the one on the left that you can see the smile and then the teeth around it.
The teeth around.
That guy, like I always have been obsessed with just that little pocket of information. But something that like, it's kind of weird, but and I imagine you guys are kind of that same way too. But like when I was like a kid, and especially even now, like if I like zone out or I look at like a pattern or even just like random things, I can like make faces out of stuff. So like that just kind of fused that interest so much with this and like has that kind of horror surrealism. So
there's a term for that as well. It's almost like a condition where you see faces in, you know, the most abstract patterns and stuff in real life. But I'm very much the same as well.
Yeah. So I think this kind of just brings me back to that feeling a lot.
Well, I think it's that sensation of like, you know, just keep adding on to something and just keep you know, like when I this is the kind of stuff that I would like to like doodle in my notebooks, where it would just be like zombie skulls, but I just do like 1 million of them because it's a fun exercise.
Yeah.
But this like and then with the framing device, and then the pop of red, it's so iconic. But also, like, it's great how, like, this is a death metal album, and some of those faces are so silly.
Yeah,
like, with the big stretching out smiling face on the bottom. Like, it's so silly, but like it all comes together as this totally killer, like, gnarly looking cover.
It always reminded me of Hellraiser, though, that face at the bottom, where they stretch the skin out and stuff. So even though it does, in black and white seem quite silly, it did always seem to me like it was skin being stretched. So it's still very visceral.
Yeah, it's still hellish, and like that's something where, like, I also start to think of, like, okay, that's a record mat. That's an easy T-shirt. That's a easy just design that you can slap on anything and it'll look great.
The face is almost, it's similar to the Left Hand Path one. There's those little ghostly comedy faces in that, which, again, they're just a bit silly for that sort of stuff. But, that's what happens when you get like an 18, 19-year-old kid doing this sort of stuff. So it's quite amazing that it's as good as it is.
Yeah, that's insane. And a great album as well. Musically, it's just such an iconic album. I remember I actually bought this on CD as well for the album cover, and just because I heard about Morbid Angel, and just the blast beats and just the weird guitar whammy solos and stuff that you would hear in there, like the weird bends that you would hear from the guitarist.
Yeah,
I forget his name.
Trey,
that's it.
Yeah,
just so weird, just kind of bleak sounds. I don't know if you guys remember the music video for God of Emptiness as well. I think that was on the Covenant album. Yep. Insane video, dude. Really one of my all-time favorite music videos, and it's a really slow burning. I don't know if any of you guys have seen it. Have you seen it, James?
I don't think I've seen it. Like, I know the album, but I don't know the music video. But I'll have to look it up after this.
Dude, Dan, have you seen it?
I haven't. No, I haven't seen that. Dude,
it's so sick, honestly. So, like, one of my all-time favorite. Like, it's kind of like visual, like, practical effects. So it's like this monastery, and it's kind of like band performance as well. But you just see this gradual decaying of one of these monks, and he just, in the end, he turns into this really gross bat. But it's like full-on, like, Tim Burton-esque practical effects, like big.
I wouldn't expect that with Morbid Angel. That's cool, though.
It's such a cool video, and it's all black and white, very slow burning. And the song "God of Emptiness" is just such a grim song. Like great. That hook,
amazing.
That hook line is just, it fits so well to the video. You have to watch it when we're done.
I was actually curious, like, maybe not just with Seagrave's work, but in any of these pieces, have any of you guys, like, seen the originals?
No.
Neither have I. Like, I know
an exhibit at Bloodstock.
Yeah, I heard about that, and, like, I'm nowhere near Bloodstock, but, like, with so many of these artists, I don't know if the musicians have the originals, or like they a lot of these artists just kind of keep to themselves, don't do gallery shows and all that sort of stuff. Like, but I feel like, I don't know, if I were some, like, big guy in the metal business that had, like, real power, I'd try to get a bunch of these artists all together for, like, a big, like, gallery show to show all of these different iconic covers, because, like, it's so hard to see any of these. Like, where are they? Have they been kept up with? Like, what is this painted on? What does it look like? How big is it? That's one of those things. Like, if I had the powers to do that, I would want to get everybody together and just, like, put together a big gallery somewhere where everybody could see it.
This is what I really like about Paolo Gerardi's work. You can always see him painting it like it is him just doing these oil paintings, and he's always got these photos of him like with a big keg of beer, like
shirtless,
shirtless, just listening to like Judas Priest in the background, Man of War, just like it's so cool. I love that guy so much, but you can see him painting his stuff, and it's just so sick.
His chest hairs are in those paintings. You know it.
I think his brushes are made of those chest hairs.
That's chest bristles. Yeah.
Save some money. All right, James, you ready for your number one?
I think so, maybe.
All right, we got Battle Axe with Burn Us Down.
It really is, bad out of hell. Battle Axe.
Burn you right and eat your heart out. I mean, this is just on another level.
He's got a fur coat. He's got tasseled boots. Oh my god!
I'm super familiar with this album cover, and I reckon it is probably the sort of de facto leader in classic bad album covers, like as in terms of its famousness. Like there's loads of sort of bad things that have been done before, but this one is just the absolute best. And again, it's one of those ones that it walks that line of somebody who can nearly draw okay but doesn't know what something good looks like.
Yeah, they're almost there. Their bad taste is almost bad enough to be good.
That's right.
I bet this album actually rules. The other two, I don't know. This one I bet does.
I'm led to believe it's actually a pretty solid album. Like, yeah. But
I like the colors.
The color choices are pretty strong, actually.
Yeah.
It's like those
the yellow, like reflecting off the logo, is actually pretty cool.
Little thing. Well, have you seen the early Pantera album covers?
I was potentially going to pick one of those.
Yeah, they're really funny, like as well, because it's just like friend who has some pencils that's done it.
Yeah. Give us an Orange Panther,
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
All right, for real, number one.
There we go.
Yeah, amazing. Yeah.
I had to go with that. I think for me, like in terms of just like a piece of design, this is like the best metal cover ever. Like Doug Johnson's work is very, specific. It's this style. He did it for Turbo and Defenders of the Faith. This is one of those things that I'd always try to keep in my mind, that like it's so unique, it's so easily like readable, and it's so like simple in its shapes and colors, but it's like one of the most like iconic, powerful images in metal like ever. And also just a big red circle behind it, and that's what you need for the background. It's stuff like this I think always helps to remind me that like more is not better. Sometimes it's just the inherent like silhouette or the base idea and how you render that idea that can really make something just look awesome. This is like a design that you can print on anything and it will look cool. And it's likely doable to print on anything because it's very minimal in colors.
It reminds me of the Don't Break the Oath one that you chose. Not necessarily in terms of the style of it, but just in terms of the strong aspects about it. Kind of, here's a bit of yellow, black, and red. Super iconic, super powerful image that, like you say, is instantly readable. You could silhouette it, you could pick it out of a lineup, and it just does all the same things.
It's something you can see a mile away.
The really kind of graphic, dynamic angle of how everything's following the motion of it as well just adds to the power of it. So cool.
And it's I guess it's another one where like this doesn't look anything like my art, but definitely like the approach that I like with some of my stuff, where I really like it to have like a retro feel, or at least have like big, strong shapes that are recognizable, to where you can easily pick pick through it if you're like searching for albums in terms of like, okay, I know what that looks like. Like that's very much like when I did the Electrified Brain cover for Municipal Waste. You know, this is nothing like that, but it was that idea sense where we want something.
I see what you mean. Yeah.
We need like a simple idea, but just executed well. And an image you can see from across the room is very loud and in your face. This is just like the best, the coolest thing ever.
And it's got a sense of movement like the Electrified Brain one as well. You know, even though it's there is that still sense of dynamics in the piece that I guess is another sort of similarity. But yeah, like you say, it's super, super cool. And I'd never even considered it as best album covers ever. But in terms of when you sort of spell it out and you see it and you think of how iconic it is and how, you know, there's maybe an argument for it to be made as the best Priest album as well, that it ticks so many boxes of what you want.
I think the yellow background and the very weathered sort of framing really makes it timeless, because I imagine if that was just maybe the red circle and just a black background, there'd be something about it that would seem quite dated. But I think because it's a very bold choice of color as well, the yellow especially, for me it just gives it a really timeless factor.
Yeah, and it's something where there's such bright colors. They're so saturated and can potentially, you know, it's very like you got to know how to use those colors, because those are also, you know, like McDonald's colors.
Yeah.
So
Exactly. Yeah.
It's I think because it's slightly mustard, it's not like yellow. That helps. But I also like things like this where like I can see the sculpt of it. I could see somebody like figuring out how this thing would look as like a statue of some kind, because it's so well defined and so well imagined. Or I want to see like an animation of it. You know, like it's that's one of those things where I could have it printed on anything and I will gladly wear it. Shirts, shorts, shoes, hat, anything. It'll always look cool.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Well,
wow,
6 hours.
Fuck yeah.
Yeah. That's the record.
The epic length that it deserved.
I don't think I've been up this late in a long time, like maybe since I was in my 18 to 20 years old.
This is what, half, I don't know what the time is. I don't have is it 3:30 or something like that, our time, Shindy?
Jesus, man.
I know. I did not think it'd be this long, but
I've had a blast. I've had an absolute blast. It's been great.
Yeah. I mean, especially since like none of us will likely all meet at one place. So stuff like this is just being able to hang out with your fellow artists.
Absolutely. Well, as we mentioned, it just so happens that Shindy lives about an hour and a bit away from my parents at the other side of the country from me. So we might have an annual hangout or something like that. We're 600 miles apart right now, but yeah, obviously the rest of us being in different places at the same time, it's all different parts of the state. So this is pretty close though, really, isn't it? If you have a beer and stuff like that, there's not that much difference between someone being on the other end of a screen versus the other end of a room. So yeah, it was super fun, and it wouldn't have lasted this long if it wasn't that much fun.
Exactly.
Yeah, and this is fun stuff to talk about too, and you know, it's nice. You know, I'm sure we can all talk to our like significant others and families about this sort of stuff, but it's never quite the same because they don't really know.
That's it, because a lot of people just sort of see a picture, go, "That's a nice picture," but they don't really know what makes a nice picture or not. And you can just do a shit picture, and they might be like, "Oh yes, I quite like that." They've not really they've not analyzed it. You kind of
think, don't you, like you're just being polite, aren't you? Like you don't really like it,
or even know. Like I think it's not even that. It's not even the liking it. It's not knowing if something's good or not, which some people don't have. And nothing wrong with that. Like, people like all sorts of music and all sorts of everything and all sorts of films and comedy, but obviously we're a lot closer to it. And actually, so it's always really funny when you've spent 5 hours or 100 hours and the missus walks in and goes, "Oh, that looks quite cool," and it's got the same level of response to something that's like an early sketch versus a formulated thing that you've been slaving over.
Yeah, good job.
Yeah. Good job, buddy.
Thanks.
All right. Well, I hope you guys all enjoyed the episode. We can stick around just for like a minute. Please like, subscribe. I'll put everybody's links in the description here. We got Shindy Design, Dan Goldswothy, and James Bousema. Signing off. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
Cheers.